dear noble ones. So, on Nature here, but I've got a few open, ready here in the tabs, we read, first human genome from ancient Egypt sequence from 4,800 years old teeth. 40 years after the first effort to extract mummy DNA, researchers have finally generated a full genome sequence from an ancient Egyptians. Big deal! And you know why this is a big deal, noble ones? This is a big deal because of the date. You see, this is not genome from an ancient Egyptians from the New Kingdom. This is not a genome of, but it's Ptolemaic Egypt. No, sir. This is from the very beginning of Egyptian history. We've got a full genome. So, if we consider some of the debates that I've had online over the years, this guy should be from what? Sudan? Am I right? Because if he's not, then we're going to have a problem. Because this is the very beginning of ancient Egypt. And I'll tell you all the details on who this person was, but let me just say that if anyone is going to try and say, oh, probably a tourist, this guy was pretty high, elite, pottery worker, so no, this was an ancient Egyptian, all right? Oldest and most complete ancient Egyptian human genome ever sequenced reveals ties to... I'm sorry, I need to do that.
Mesopotamia.
But this is not, you've seen nothing. Ancient Egyptian genome reveals 4,500-year-old genetic ties to Mesopotamia. So this study is a study that is very recent, very recent. Finally, we see an ancient Egyptian genetic connections, and it's Levantine. Man, I've been saying this. This is the full study. I've already read the entire thing, which took a while. And when it comes to the genomic stuff and all the detailed explanation, I think I might need help from a professional. But regardless of that, I'll be honest, okay? Because you know me, I'm always intellectually honest, regardless of what people say. Of course, this is one person. So it's not that now I'm going to say every single ancient Egyptians had ties to the Levant, or that every single one had ties. But because I'm not the one who says they were all black, but I'm the one who said they were mixed, it seems like a certain expansion and population relocation already was a thing at the very beginning of ancient Egypt, as we always said. And now we have proof. So how about we have a look? Teeth from an elderly man who lived around the time that the earliest pyramids were built have yielded the first full human genome sequence from ancient Egypt. And I'm all for it. The remains are 4,800 to 4,500 year old, overlapping with a period in Egyptian history known as the Old Kingdom of the Age of the Pyramid. They harbor signs of ancestry similar to that of other ancient North Africans as well as people from the Middle East, researchers report today in Nature. This is huge. And I'll show you, because what we are reading today, if you do this, okay, it shouldn't be that surprising. Because you see, when people claim that the ancient Egyptians' origin is down here, they're out of their mind. When they say it's from here, I'm like, okay, fine, I can see some people moving, great. If they say from Sudan, I'm like, well, that's relatively close. And one thing that I do agree with a lot of people that are usually my intellectual opponents, but I still will say it if I agree, is that if we consider the African humid period, then yeah, the Sahara wasn't a barrier if we go really, really back in time. Like I'm talking 14,000 years ago, all the way up to 5,000 years ago. This was green and all that, so it wasn't a complete blockage. Problem is that what they fail to admit is that there is no barrier here either. And what people often don't realize, I suppose, is that the African continent is literally connected by land to Asia and the Near East, which means you can walk it. So how are people okay with thinking that the ancient Egyptians, they were all from this area, they're okay with them going through this, but when you say, but what about population movement like this, not to mention that you can move by sea, and we know for a fact that all of these populations, see the Phoenicians for example, did move by sea. So you can do this by sea, and you can do this by land, and yet they act as if there is a massive barrier here, which makes absolutely no sense. And now not only we had clear indication of cultural continuity and connections between people from the Levant and ancient Egypt, because if ancient Egypt had zero connection to this section of the world and the Eastern Mediterranean, it would literally be the only North African area in the sea that would have zero connection, since Libya has those connections. Tunisia and Carthage, we just demonstrated that it's connected to the entirety of the Aegean, in fact, and to Europe up to a certain extent. And I know they're gonna hate me for saying that, but I'm not saying it. DNA analysis is, and that's the same all the way here. All of this coastline, including my beautiful island of Sicily, is being continuously moved, showed population clusters from this area to go, but for some reasons they didn't go to Egypt. It is obvious that this is a conduit of multi-ethnicity. It is multi-ethnic like the rest of it, of this area here, but yet they act like this is a barrier. Well, it's not, and now we have proof, because the one single complete genome that we have from this period genetically connected to this area of the... What you gonna say now? Are you gonna admit, oh wow, this goes away? Of course not. They're gonna say it's a lie. But who cares? I'm making this video for you, not for them. Abstract. Ancient Egyptian society flourished for millennia, reaching its peak during the dynastic period, approximately 3150 to 30 BC. However, owing to poor DNA preservation, questions about regional interconnectivity over time have not been addressed because whole genome sequencing has not yet been possible. Here we sequenced a 2 times coverage whole genome from an adult male Egyptian excavated at Nuwariat. Sorry if I mispronounced it. This is south of Cairo, well, not too far from Memphis, in fact. Radiocarbon dated 2800 to 2800 BC, okay? He lived a few centuries after Egyptian unifications, bridging the early dynastic and old kingdom periods. The body was interred in a ceramic pot within a rock-cut tomb. And by the way, it's because he was a potter, among other things, potentially contributing to the DNA preservation. Most of his genome is best represented by North African Neolithic ancestry among available sources at present. Yes, approximately 20% of his genetic ancestry can be traced to genomes representing the Eastern Fertile Crescent, including Mesopotamia and surrounding regions. So, this ancient Egyptian, we don't know how typical he was, but this ancient Egyptian has ties to local populations in North Africa and the Levant. Nothing further down. This genetic affinity is similar to the ancestry appearing in Anatolia and the Levant during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. But we did see that already the Carthaginians had Anatolian ancestry and Aegean ancestry, DNA and makeup. And once again, we see the same in Egypt. And it shouldn't surprise us because, again, North Africa is in the Mediterranean. This is what these people did. Whether you like it or not, these were seafarers. And they were settlers, they were colonizers, and they were spreading for economic reasons. Sometimes it's more a trade network. Although more genomes are needed to fully understand the genomic diversity of early Egyptians, as I was saying, of course, I'm not going to say one is enough, but according to certain people, this should have been a guy from Sudan. Our results indicate the contacts between Egypt and the Eastern Fertile Crescent were not limited to objects and imagery, such as domesticated animals and plants, as well as writing systems, but also encompassed human migration. And human migration means intermixing. And intermixing is exactly what we are finding here, since 20% is from the Levant. This is phenomenal, guys. This is like, it's exactly what I've been expecting. Like all the years where we were looking at the pictorial evidence, we were looking at debating all the ways of, but it depends because the colors and the pigments. And then, but what about these vases? Because these vases are used as well. The same techniques are used in Mesopotamia. And they were like, no, because not from this place. We fought over this for years. Kept telling me I was lying. And now genomic, they do one, and he points to the Fertile Crescent. 0 DNA from Sudan or Horn of Africa and whatnot. So we were talking a little bit about the tomb of Seti I, KV 17, so not the temple that we have discussed with the hieroglyphs, but the tomb. And what I wanted to show you is that this is part of the basis of my answer to, for instance, the Afrocentrist community, among others, when they were talking about the real and true color of the Egyptians. Now, given this is a lot more interesting and deep than the skin tone of a population. In fact, if anything, that's one of the least interesting aspects of an ancient civilization. It's just that it's unfortunately a battlefield for war within the culture war, and therefore that's why it's often brought up. But today I don't necessarily want to focus on that too much. I'll present a couple of things, a couple of points, but I do want to discuss the broader point, which can be used when talking about preservation of pigments in both the Bronze Age, Iron Age, all the way up to classical antiquity, and how color and pigments react to exposure to the weather, but also, unfortunately, manumission and intervention of external sources, including us, human beings. So, you know, when I said very early on, as I was showing you a little bit about this study, which once again is from the University of Florence, for you who are interested, it was the Department of Architecture, University of Florence, Italy. The reason why you have a connection between the tomb of Seti I and the University of Florence is the same reason as to why you have the same connection with France, Louvre, in fact. And that's because if you look at this image on the right, you will notice that this is the map, the 2D map of the tomb of Seti I that we've just discussed. And as you see, there is a staircase, and so you enter, and as you go into section F to section G, and you go up this staircase as you are exploring the tombs, then you'll notice that in this zoomed in picture, you will notice that on both sides of these walls, the walls are covered with artistic representations and pictorial art. And two plates, we could say, were removed by archaeologists. One was sent to the Florence Egyptian Museum, and it is found there right now. And the other one was sent into the Louvre Museum and can be found and examined there. That's why you have this connection. Elements were removed and these elements were transported. And unfortunately, at least when we talk about the one in Italy, these were not preserved well at all, which is really, really a shame. Look at this. On the right, we see the original picture, photograph of the current conditions of this drawing that we see here. You will notice that, they have got black hair. Both the queen and the pharaoh have got black hair. Their skin is very dark. They've got some gold, we see some green, some blue, we can see all of this. The one on the left is how the original colors would have looked. Blue hair and blue horns on the crown. So basically what's happening here, which is one of the main items of debate and clash with the Afrocentric community when I made several videos on ancient Egypt, is that one of the main points of debate is that they say, they do it for the skin. I'm not interested in the skin right now. But in general, the main point of debate and argument is that these are ancient, and so the colors fade. And so whatever color we see, the original would have been darker. The reality that has been proven without any shade of a doubt by this study, I will give you a link, is that in this specific case, with the tomb of Seti I, and there are several other occasions in which this happens, not just in ancient Egypt, but also in classical antiquity in the Mediterranean basin, is that oftentimes the opposite happens. Pigment darkens with time. Darkens with time. So it depends. There is no, if you hear an umbrella statement, pigment fades away, so the colors were always darker, that's wrong. In this case specifically, blue became black. Now, if you really want to talk about the ethnicity, whatever, yeah, the queen had dark skin. Totally. I would consider this a brown skin. So, yeah, sure, great, fantastic. As you know, there is a veritable cornucopia of different skin tones because, in my worldview, my position, ancient Egypt was a multi-ethnic civilization. They had people with different skin tones, as we see the way they represented themselves in art and how they represented other people. By the way, In this specific tomb, there is the very famous, some say infamous, representation of not only themselves, but also the Nubians, who are clearly black, and different from the regular Egyptian, whose skin is instead a mixture of brown and red, if we want to look at the pigments used. But do remember, oftentimes the pigments, the way they look now, are darker because of the aging. And then we see Asiatics, sometimes we see Roman, and Romans look European. The Romans look just European. Some have like kind of very fair skin. Brown hair has been shown as a representation of Romans. Black hair has been shown as a representation of Romans. So if you cut my hair, I could have been a good representative of a Roman when it comes to both, in some cases, when it comes to both skin and complexion. But sometimes they have a lighter brown as well that's shown in Egyptian representations of Romans. And then you have the Asiatics tend to be very light skinned, and so are the Libyans. And you can recognize the Libyans because they have an ostrich feather on their head, ostrich being a connection that the ancient Egyptians recognized with the Libyans specifically. And so we will see all of this. I'll show you some of this stuff. I do just want to focus on this because the study shows phenomenal evidence that demonstrates that color and pigment can darken with time. You can even see it with a naked eye, and they did not use the naked eye. They used all sorts of technology, like for instance the XRF spectra and a lot of other stuff that I've already actually described in details in one of my videos. Now it's been a while since I read it. When it comes to the technical aspects of it, it is spectroscopic analysis, and and it's proven a lot of the art that we see was lighter. Yeah, there we go. Look, to connect to what the archaeologist that we talked about was saying about how you prepare these walls before you start inscribing the hieroglyphs. The figures were first sketched in red, as I was telling you. The final outlines were then traced in black by another artist to create the final and correct guide for the sculptor. A coating, thin, gypsum, I don't know how to read it, you'll have to help me with this, based preparatory layer was given to ensure a homogeneous background from the chromatic and absorption point of view. The high technical quality of the tombs of Thebes, also due to the excellent quality of the rock, a fine, homogeneous and compact limestone, ensured a good preservation of the paintings observed by many travelers of the past. So already we see that someone in chat actually earlier on was saying, how are they so perfectly sketched? Because they prepare them. The main in situ causes of degradation of these architectures are infiltration of water with the consequent transport of salts, detachment of and fall of fragments, as we were discussing, but also cracks due to the mechanics of the rock layers. They reuse as dwellings, barns, hermitages, warehouses can have caused different transformations over the centuries, from carbon black deposits of lamps and fireplaces till the cuts in the rock walls. Yeah, and then there is the whole section where I remember that they discussed that, and as I say, I did read the letters where they say that look at this, exactly this. I want to read this last thing. Giambattista Belzoni discovered the tomb in 1817, but in reality it was discovered by Zahi Hawass because he discovered everything. But anyways, and he immediately realized its importance, describing it as the principal, open quotes, the principal, the most perfect and splendid monument in that country, close quotes. He did make drawings and wax casts, that already, of many decorations and staged an exhibition in England in 1821. The conservation conditions were good, and many of the early visitors said that the colors were as fresh as if the painters had just finished their work. This is mind-blowing. The plates attached to his publication document some of the removed reliefs still in place. The opening through began a long degenerative process since the following year, when a flood caused the fall of fragments from walls and ceilings. So similar situations happened in the temple of Seti I as well. And when you read one more thing that I want to add to this, and it's there was a practice that happened when there was a craze with tourists, and what they would do is that they would create wet paper casts of the hieroglyphs and also a lot of the art. So what that does is that they would take like a paper, damp it and put it on top of the wall, and that would take some of the pigments and kind of create a little bit of a carbon copy of it, and then they could sell it. This was done a lot, which was a disgrace, and that ruined a lot of these. So the preservation is different to the way it was, and some of the reasons, again, when we look at these, we may think it's because it's 1,000 years old. The reality is because of all the nonsense that happened in the last 200 years. So what is the premise of this case? About a year ago I published a video titled "Were the Ancient Egyptians Black? The Truth?" The video had excellent views, and I appreciate you noble ones for giving this video the success I believe it deserved. Your trust is not misplaced. A short time after its publication, the channel Quelimika responded with a debunking video. There are several factors that influence whether I decide to enter a debate publicly or not. Now, he qualified because he brings forth some decent points, he's clearly educated, and he doesn't call me a racist, so Quelimika, I commend you for that. With that being said, he does accuse me of this.
We're going to expose the lack of rigor and intellectual integrity in the research of the Metatron's video on ancient Egypt. So stop misleading people and do more research, please. I doubt that he did proper research for his video. Joke's on you, man. Joke's on you, Metatron.
Which I don't take lightly. At the end of the day, a public debate can be a great opportunity for systematic reflection, which is always welcome, and it can also be mutually constitutive. With that being said, this conversation will happen based on these parameters. Any point of agreement will have to be ontological, factual, and documented. I would like to begin by saying that this is not a direct attack to him. However, when I do enter a debate, I fully enter a debate and I take it very seriously. So I didn't just watch his video response. I watched and analyzed every single video on his entire channel with my full team, including 2 linguists, 1 archaeologist, 1 Egyptologist, a published historian, and anthropologist PhD. I've also identified several rhetorical devices that he uses on his video response to me in order to be more persuasive. These do not constitute honest discourse, hence every time he uses one, I will point it out and call it out. Within his audience, he has people who are interested in historical truth. I have no quarrel with them whatsoever, but he also has people who are in utter rebellion against external factual reality and have attacked me personally, mostly based on me having white skin, as evidenced by the comments section of my original video. Regardless of all the attacks that I've received on my original video due to his response, I have not disabled the comment section because freedom of speech. But these are clear attempts at manipulation meant to shut down valid criticism or opposing views. This is clearly out of his control, so I encourage my subscribers to not retaliate to that. Skin tone does not matter. Let's attack arguments only, and boy, am I in full assault mode today. This is what we are disagreeing about. My point. Ancient Egypt was a multicultural and multi-ethnic civilization due to its geolocation connecting the Middle East, Africa, Asia and Europe, a strategic location on the crossroad of continents, flourishing around the Nile River, which was a cultural conduit of civilization. Therefore, there is diversity on the skin of the Egyptians. Throughout time and location, the ethnic percentages will vary depending on era and region. According to the results of my research, the majority of ancient Egyptians would have had an olive skin, with a lower percentage of black individuals living mostly in the southern areas of Egypt, and some white settlers and white ruling elite during the later periods. The ancient Egyptians were a multi-ethnic African civilization, and their ethnicity was inextricably tied to their geographic location. Your point. Ancient Egypt was originally founded by one indigenous black African culture, namely the Naqada culture from down South Africa, and the other Eurasian ethnic groups joined in later and constituted a minority. You in fact make fun of the Egypt was a multi-ethnic society argument, so to you, the ancient Egyptians were predominantly black. My goal is to defend objective reality. Your goal seems to want to rectify the current understanding of African history and culture. The two would not be necessarily mutually exclusive unless bias enters the picture. And talking about bias,
We're going to expose the lack of rigor and intellectual integrity in the research of the Metatron's video on ancient Egypt.
Be that as it may, I respect the fact you have the freedom to think that, but you'll need more than a constant repetition of this statement in order to foster such advances. So let's identify the issue. Intellectual rigor is the ability to make well-researched arguments that are supported by logic and evidence. Clearly, the presence of a strong bias will work against this objective. Do you concur? Now, I have nothing against an honest and critical introspection, but you're accusing me of lacking intellectual rigor. And then the content I produced on this topic was not based on carefully considered deep empirical studies based on consistent data analysis, which it was, but that it was rather a shoddy research born of a strong bias, which according to you I have, so this is an exercise in certainty, isn't it? So, bias being the key word here. Are you sure you want to use that one, Quelimika? Now let me show the viewer why you are standing on very weak ground with this accusation of bias. Clearly our audiences cannot read our minds, so how can they determine who is the biased one here? Well, let's discuss the consequences of admitting fault when it comes to the research of our videos. When it comes to my channel, I cover a wide range of topics, ancient Egypt being a very marginal one. If evidence is presented to counter my arguments, it would not hurt my channel nor my public image one bit if I had to admit fault due to new overwhelming evidence. I know that because I have admitted fault in the past. You, on the other hand, have an entire channel based on ancient Egypt being black. So during this debate, if you admit you were wrong, your entire channel will cease to exist. Differently from me, you have a lot at stake here. So given the stakes, who is more likely to be intellectually dishonest here? Me or you? Just as a matter of deductive logic, it is an absolute no-brainer to recognize the fact that repercussions may increase an individual's proclivity to certain types of bias. Are your eyes diverted away from factual truth because of a conflict of interest? On top of that, if one were to look at your channel banner, well, you did go out of your way to take the entirety of planet Earth and turn it around just so you could put Africa on top of Europe. That doesn't exactly fill me with confidence when it comes to your supposed lack of bias. So there is that.
So as someone who cares about our history,
The expression "our history" is a massive red flag for me, as I have explained on this dedicated video. With this choice of words, you seem to be claiming ethnic exclusivity over the history and culture of an entire continent just based on the color of your skin. Now, on your video you did not call me a racist, so I'll return the favor and give you the benefit of the doubt, also because reading negative intent in an otherwise ambiguous situation is not exactly, shall we say, my style. But if you are in fact going down that road, then let me say this. Egypt faces the Mediterranean. I am Mediterranean. My sea, my history too.
Metatron starts by saying that the question is a complicated one and multi-layered. His video claims to summarize a multi-centenary-old debate in what, 18 minutes? This here is already an issue.
The problem alluded to by Quelimika here is that since I admitted that Egypt and its ethnicity is a complex and multi-layered topic, then the fact that my video was only 18 minutes long is somehow an attack on my credibility. Having chosen this point of critique, surely if we were to look at his channel, all of his videos when dealing with complex topics would have to be extremely long. Right? The African origins of humanity sounds like a pretty deep and multi-layered topic right there. Oh, 8 minutes and 20 seconds. African origins of astronomy, this one must be 1 hour long, right? 11 minutes 33. Was Ramses II black? 20 minutes topic? 2 minutes and 8 seconds. Are you sure you wanna use that against me? 3 minutes shocking truth? This is the first deceptive indicator within your speech pattern. Called out. You have a clear double standard at play here. Therefore, I call this point of attack indefendable.
As you see here, Metatron goes to find a guy on Twitter that is claiming extreme stuff that do not at all represent the arguments for a black Egypt.
This one hasn't aged well, has it? You said that me pointing out a random guy believing that Cleopatra should be black was pointless because, I mean, nobody believes that. And then this happened. Well, you clearly didn't see that one coming. I did. You ridiculed me for bringing up this whole Cleopatra was black point.
Joke's on you, man.
Remember, noble ones, not everything that sounds persuasive constitutes a valid point of argument.
Yes, Egypt is in Africa. Thank you for acknowledging a fact.
On this point, we are in alignment.
A quick search on Wikipedia will help you know the scholars that have spoken for and against this hypothesis. A quick search on Wikipedia. It's not that hard. Anyhow.
This is a subtle conversation trick. Well, it's such an easy thing to do, just look it up on Wikipedia, but you couldn't even do that. Well, first of all, it's a non-argument. I do not use Wikipedia, Quelimika, and to be honest, neither should you. At least if you want any academic value to your work. Also, could this be another case of double standards at play here? Let's see if he has ever mentioned Wikipedia negatively. On his video about the African origin of astronomy on minute 2, 37 seconds in, he absolutely seems to be agreeing with me on this point.
With online encyclopedia Wikipedia fails to mention Naphtha in its article on the history of astronomy. I wonder why.
Second deceptive indicator within your speech pattern. Mate, I'm using your own videos here. So based on your own words, it seems like we both agree that a quick search on Wikipedia isn't exactly the best thing to suggest to your intellectual opponent during a debate.
Is Metatron aware that the ancient Greeks unanimously called the ancient Egyptians black?
Is Metatron aware that the ancient Greeks unanimously called the ancient Egyptians black? Okay. Within this rhetorical question of yours, there are several presuppositions that I believe need to be addressed. And besides, within your entire debunking video, this is in fact your weakest point. How can I put it? You are, let's be generous, catastrophically mistaken here. Allow me to elaborate. There isn't only one verse that can completely debunk this point of yours, there is a whole cluster of passages, a veritable cornucopia, which I'll report here, one by one. Furthermore, your linguistic approach within the realm of translation contains significant methodological flaws, and just like the majority of Afrocentric scholars, you omit passages that contradict your statements. Any methodology needs to be pragmatic because the linguistic categories born from any analysis are clearly developed in line with the research questions, with a constant overlap between theory and empirical data. As the basic structure of a linguistic research and interpretation, what we did as a team is that first we established the genre and discourse of the text in question, also trying to sample for other ethnographic information. Then we tried to locate similar text with similar topics. Beginning with the systematic analysis of lexical resources and lexicosyntactic features of text, we moved through a systemic function data analysis of genre and text metafunction. In your linguistic section, you did none. Concurrently, when dealing with or using ancient Greek or even classical Latin vocabulary, you do not deal with absolutes. This is an absolute here. So let's address the word unanimously that you have chosen. Whenever we wish to use the words of the ancients, for example the ancient Greeks, we need to remember that in order to do it professionally, well, every written or spoken word produced in the ancient texts is a discursive event and therefore needs to be placed in its correct cultural context, since language and culture are inherently intertwined. Moreover, the historical context need to also be analyzed and integrated within the interpretation. With that in mind, let's now talk about the word Ethiopian in ancient Greek text. The original Greek word derives from the word I burn, plus the word face, so literally it means burnt face. It occasionally refers to the population south of Egypt, but in general it's an indicator of a specific phenotypic type, not a population. For example, to Pliny, the word Ethiopians indicates not only the populations living in the southern territories of the Roman province of Egypt, so in Africa Proconsularis, we are talking about the populations led by the famous Kandake Amanirenas in Nubia or Kingdom of Meroe, but it also indicates the populations living in the southern borders of the Gaetuli, so we're talking about modern-day Niger. We therefore see, very important first indicator, that saying Ethiopians from an ancient Greek perspective is not the same as saying Ethiopians from a modern perspective. With this contextual detail in mind, let's read the ancients. This passage comes from Astronomica, written by Manilius, and is a Latin didactic poem about celestial phenomena. The Ethiopians stain the world and depict a race of men steeped in darkness. Less sunburnt are the natives of India. The land of Egypt, flooded by the Nile, darkens bodies more mildly, owing to the inundation of its fields. It is a country nearer to us, and its moderate climate imparts a medium tone. Let's continue. From Arrianus, between the 1st and 2nd century. The appearance of the inhabitants is also not very different in India and Ethiopia. The southern Indians are rather more like Ethiopians, as they are black to look on, and their hair is black, only they are not so snub-nosed or woolly-haired as the Ethiopians. The northern Indians are most like the Egyptians, physically. Unanimously? I'm not done. From Strabo, in its Geography, between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. As for the people of India, those in the south are like the Ethiopians in color, although they are like the rest in respect to countenance and hair, for on account of the humidity of the air, their hair does not curl, whereas those in the north are like the Egyptians. Next one. Philostratus, nicknamed the Athenian, writes, "For when he arrived at the confines of Ethiopia and Egypt, and the name of the place is Sikaminus, he came across a quantity of uncoined gold and linen. It was a marketplace to which the Ethiopians bring all the products of their country, and the Egyptians in their turn take them all away and bring to the same spot their own wares of equal value. Now the inhabitants of the marches being the bordering land between Egypt and Nubia, for context, are not yet fully black, but are half-breeds in matter of color. For they are partly not so black as the Ethiopians, yet partly more so than the Egyptians." So, according to an ancient Greek, the Egyptians are the light-skinned, the Ethiopians are the black-skinned, and these inhabitants of the marches are in between. Unanimously? I'm not done. This is another ancient Greek term, often found in period sources to describe skin tone, and it's one of the favorite of Afrocentric scholars. And it is used to assert the ancient Egyptians' phenotypic type as being black. And for example, they use the words of Herodotus. In reality, anyone who even has the most basic experience in translation of the classics in ancient Greek will tell you that this term is fundamentally polysemic. And it can mean both a black skin or a darker skin as a result of tanning. So, when translating Herodotus, how do we know which one it is? This is when the discussion enters the domain of discourse analysis. Let's have a look at the passage used by Homer in the Odyssey, where this specific term is used, so we can establish a pattern. Here is when Athena brings youth back to Ulysses. We read, "Athena touched him with her golden wand. A well-washed cloak and a tunic she first of all cast about his breast, and she increased his stature and his youthful bloom. Once more he grew dark of skin, and his cheeks filled out, and a beard that was dark grew about his chin." Let's use Occam razors here. Do you think that in this case this word is specifically meaning that Athena changed Ulysses' ethnicity and turned him from a Greek into a black African? Or should we read it within the cultural context of ancient Greece and understand it or interpret it as, no, he's returning a darker complexion, a youthful tan to a man who was now old, spent most of his time indoor, and therefore his skin had become whiter? Well, considering the fact that we know that the Greeks attributed a tan to youth and a very pale skin to old age, it's no-brainer. This is just one example of the relation between language use and the wider socio-cultural structures which you do not seem to take into consideration. Ever. As mentioned by Frank Snowden, often Afrocentric scholars tend to misinterpret color words in ancient Greek in order to push a specific interpretation of the text that supports their claims.
Just like Europeans before racism scarcely referred to themselves as white.
Also, as a little tangent here, this idea that before racism, Europeans did not use or identify themselves as white, well, that's demonstrably wrong again. From Lucianus, we read, "If an Ethiopian who has never traveled saw people different from us, and he categorically stated in an assembly of Ethiopians that neither white men nor blonde men exist, and only black men exist, would his statement be accepted?" Just so you know, the Greeks identify themselves as white, and they consider Germanic people in the north of Europe as blonde.
Therefore, the critical mind that aims to summarize the debate shall represent both sides of the arguments properly and without bias. Also, this idea of a conventional tan is a fairy tale and without bias, is a fairy tale and without bias, is a fairy tale.
This is either profound ignorance on a linguistic level or a deliberate misuse. I'll take either.
Also, when Diop and many others see and claim that the ancient Egyptian statues have African phenotypes, they start saying things like, well, statues cannot be used to determine race. Yet Metatron just used the statue to determine the race of Cleopatra, and they do the same with the Greeks.
Third deceptive indicator in your discourse, and this one is a full-on strawman fallacy. In other words, misquoting in an attempt to dominate the conversation. Not gonna happen. For reference, an intentionally misrepresented position is set up because it's easier to defeat than an opponent's real argument. This is a conversational trap, and we identified it immediately with the team. Because I never said that statues could not be used, so this becomes a strawman, and you make it sound as if I ascribe to that belief. In other words, you're trying to put me in what is called a logical fallacy of relevance. Namely, you want me to try and defend a point of view that I don't even hold. Nice try. Now, if you did this on purpose, it's a debacle, but once again, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, maybe you misunderstood me. And on the topic of statues, of course I believe that statues from all cultures and all civilization can offer something that can be gleaned from, but it really is a case-by-case situation. And even ignoring the strawman section, when you try to frame it and say, well, you see, people have double standards because when it's statues of the Greeks you use them to say, see, they're white, but when it's statues from the Egyptians, you say, that is not enough. We don't just have statues from the Greeks. We have literary descriptions, we have iconography, we have representations. They called themselves white. I wish the Egyptians called themselves black. I know you think they did, but they didn't, as we'll see on the next section.
The land known as Kemet, that is ancient Egypt's real name, Kemet, that is ancient Egypt.
I have a plethora of problems with your fixation of the word Kemet, which is also a common trait among Afrocentrists. Now, I myself have used the word Kemet on occasion. It's not that the word is wrong, but fixating on it has zero linguistic standing. Let me elaborate. First and foremost, do you always use the correct and appropriate term for describing a nation? Do you say Japan? Wrong, it's Nihon. Do you say China? Wrong, it's Zhongguo. Do you say Germany? Wrong, it's Deutschland. Also, for reference, linguistically speaking, Ancient Egyptian is an Afro-Asiatic language, and it does not have, for as much as we understand, Southern African origins. It's Kamito-Semitic. Geographically, Asia is physically connected to Africa, which is something that people seem to forget. Also, when you say Kemet, you're using the so-called E of convention used by Egyptologists when they don't know how to vocalize consonants. But the fact that archaeologists use it doesn't mean that that's the correct way to pronounce it. They're archaeologists, not linguists. To reconstruct ancient Egyptian, we need to vocalize it through Coptic and loanwords in Hebrew and in Greek, similarly to how classical Latin has been reconstructed, and throughout the transcription of cuneiform, script of the Neo-Babylonian period, and Assyrian. Also building with the similarities of the Seti dialect, we know that linguistically speaking, the pronunciation Kemet has no academic linguistic dignity. It clearly comes from the Coptic pronunciation Kem and Kemi in the Boairic dialect. The long air in open syllable in that specific position helps us understand that most likely in classical Egyptian we have a U in that position. So if we really want to be precise, then the correct and most likely pronunciation in ancient Egyptian, specifically in classical Egyptian, is Kumat, Kumatu, nominative, Kumata, accusative, and Kumati, oblique genitive. Now let's discuss this hieroglyphic inscription that you present as evidence that Kemet or Kumat in fact meant land of the black, according to you.
So, Kemet, the black land or the land of the blacks? Does it apply to the people or to the land? Probably the fertile soil, and also very likely by extension to the skin color of the originators of those words. Yes, you can translate it to the black land, and as scholars agree, it refers to the fertile soil. The Op found a place where Kemet was followed by a man and a woman sitting and 3 dots. So you take Kemet, which means the black, plus people, literally it means the black people.
We have Kemet followed by a man and a woman sitting with 3 dots. This is the determinative meaning humanity, but to you it must mean black people. First of all, the adjectival noun in plural form, Kemetiu, just means Egyptians. Kemet or Kumat just means black land, not the land of the black, as opposed to the red land of the desert. The thing is, though, that if this means black land, and this is people, why can it not be then black people? Well, this is an answer that you don't need an Egyptologist or a fully qualified linguist, you just need a first-year student to answer. Differently from English, in Egyptian, the adjective goes after the noun. It is in predicative form, not in attributive form. So in this language, it makes no sense to say first black and then men and women. If they wanted to say black people, they would write it the other way around. People black. And it just so happens that my language, Italian, functions the exact same way. In the majority of cases, the adjective follows the noun. It's after the noun, and it will make no sense to say, in fact, just like in English, black people. The ancient Egyptians would have said people black, but they don't. When you say this means black people, you're not doing linguistics. You're doing politics. We can both agree with the fact that when we look at artistic representation, men tend to have in general a darker skin tone and women tend to have a lighter skin tone. And of course there are the occasional men that have more of a yellow skin tone, but in the majority of cases we could say that those are eunuchs. So let's talk about this difference between men and women when it comes to skin tone in Egyptian art. My interpretation is the fact that it's possible that in general the population had a bit of a lighter skin tone. They weren't white, but they had a lighter skin tone, and then this skin tone becomes darker because men tend to work the fields, whereas women don't. To you, specifically, this is a fantasy. The intellectually honest answer to this is that more evidence is required to be deemed conclusive. These are theories. Since you are the one who said that it's important to evaluate and present both sides of the argument, well, you didn't. Also, I find it interesting that you say that we, people that don't agree with Afrocentric ideas, are blind. Because, I mean, you're trying so hard to prove that the word olive skin does not represent and does not work and does not match the color that we see in iconography.
I'll let the people compare olive skin complexion with the skin complexion of the ancient Egyptian wall paintings and statues. They'll be the judge, provided that they have proper eyesight. So you probably have proper eyesight, so please judge properly with your eyes, not through blinkers. I would like to show you the coloration of Egyptian wall paintings and the actual coloration of olive skin that the Metatron is talking about.
And then you show this to prove that they don't match. But I mean, I went over it with the Photoshop color picker. They are the exact same. Are you blind? Do you understand you just proved my point? Olive skin will match with some people and it will not match with others because some have an olive skin, some have a brown skin. That just proves that they are multi-ethnic. Also, let's look at this guy's skin, which you used on your video to demonstrate that current Egyptians have no relation whatsoever with ancient Egyptians. Let's compare his color on the Photoshop color picker with the color used in Egyptian paintings. This is from your video.
Only black people in this world can live there and work outside without protecting their skin because they have high melanin content that is already protecting their skin from the UV rays. There is no way a Eurasian people can live in Egypt and walk around bare chest and be fine with it. No.
Look, an Asiatic person with no shirt on, under the sun. Also, do you realize you're talking to a Sicilian? Our farmers are Europeans and work the fields, often without shirts on. This is ridiculous that only black people can survive this. And again, Sicily and Egypt have almost the same temperature. Egypt is a little hotter, I'll give you that, although it really depends on the day. Absolutely ridiculous statement. A Mediterranean is not like an Irishman.
That clearly depict African phenotypes.
You also seem to operate under the assumption that the word African just equals black. That's incorrect. And since you mentioned that I have a lack of intellectual rigor and integrity, I'm expecting precision here. Asserting an area's genetic continuity and ethnic base structure when it comes to a large continent like Africa is nonsensical. An African is a person born in Africa. Full stop. African does not equate black. You have loads of people, Berber populations for example, that have been living in Africa for thousands of years and they are not black, but they are still African. For example, the Carthaginians we know were originally a Semitic people coming from the near Levant and then moving to the northern section of where Tunisia is. Well, they are Africans. You say I deceived people when it comes to the looks of the Nubians, but by the looks of it, I'd say that you are the one who is deceiving people when it comes to what Nubians looked like, since you systematically selected and showed only images when you see both Egyptians and Nubians mixing together. You specifically chose to give more importance to a picture that shows Egyptians and Nubians together, deciding to read it as they are all Egyptians, instead of the more probable, that's a native Egyptian and that's a Nubian who lives in Egypt. And since some of these images come from tomb TT40, which belonged specifically to one of the governors of Nubia, it should not be surprising that we are looking at a more integrated, multi-ethnic section of the Egyptian territory.
He also mentioned the importance of knowing what he means by black. So he then proceeds by showing a picture of actor Mahershala Ali. So Metatron seems to be playing into the blacks are only Niger-Congo people argument. Black Africans come in many shades.
This one is just a cheap shot and it has no bearing on the topic or discussion at hand. But since I don't like it when my words are being misconstrued, like this guy did, let me clarify. On the original video, when I showed the picture of this actor because I had just finished watching a movie with him, I was not doing that to supposedly indicate that, oh, that's a black person and that's it. Only people that are like from, I don't know, originally Congo would be black, and every other variety and all the different phenotypic types within Africa, well, those are not black. I never meant to say that. It's another straw man. I was specifically responding to some academics, I can link in the video description, that are cowards, and when people ask them, so were the ancient Egyptian black or white, they say, well, they didn't have these words, black, white, they didn't have this, so they were neither. They weren't black, they weren't white. And they say, what do you mean by black? I'm not exactly clear, so that's why I gave that specific picture as a representation of only one, obviously, type of black person. I grew up in Sicily. I could see the coasts of Africa. So trying to tell me that I don't know what a black person looks like? Extremely disingenuous. As a proof of that, here is a link to this video where I specifically discuss the phenotypic variation of black people within Africa in details. You see, African populations harbor the greatest genetic phenotypic diversity according to molecular genetics and whole genome sequence data across a broad geographic range. That's due to extensive population substructure, the largest number of population-specific alleles, and less linkage disequilibrium among the loci, together with the heritable variation in human genome. This is why Africa is an important region to study human genetic diversity due to several factors such as climate variation, diet, exposure to infectious disease, a number of demographic factors such as selection, mutation, recombination and gene conversion, which result in the above-mentioned genetic and phenotypic variation within population clusters.
I mean, did you know that UNESCO organized a debate on this very subject with experts from all over the world arguing against two Africans? Guess who won that debate? It was the two Africans who were arguing that ancient Egypt was of black African origin. Did you know this? Did you do your research?
I'm fully aware of that debate, and by the way, they did not win it, like you say, but I'll have to make a dedicated video because that's gonna be a long one. And talking about making more videos on this subject,
Metatron, I hope you do better than this should you choose to speak on this issue again. If not, please leave this issue alone. Please leave the subject alone if you aren't willing to do the necessary research for it. I would actually prefer that you leave it alone.
So that's what you tell everyone who disagrees with you? To not talk? I thought you guys were into debates. If you are so sure of your research and Afrocentrist resources, why shy away from debates and asking your opponent to not speak at all? How can you find the truth? All who disagree are simply encouraged by you not to speak. Unless the truth is not what you seek, then sure, it's better for you if your opponents don't talk. But I will. In conclusion, evidence can be compelling, situational, or insignificant. You're asking me to react and consider weak evidence as compelling, and yet you are not doing that. What methods have you implemented to believe this evidence of yours that you strongly push? It is my opinion that you simply believed it blindly because it confirms your bias. I strongly believe that there is a deep, unstated emotional concern as a guiding factor for wanting certain population to be black. But facts, the truth, don't care about feelings. I understand these deep-seated feelings. But differently from you, to me, whether the ancient Egyptians were black, white, olive skin, it makes zero difference. It's absolutely irrelevant. but I speak with facts. And due to all the above-mentioned documentation and research, I hereby publicly reject your debunking. And I double down. The ancient Egyptians were multi-ethnic and multicultural. Still, Quelimika, thank you for your time, and thank you for your effort. There is only one truth. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. 1 year ago I posted a video about the results of my research on the ethnicity of the ancient Egyptians. A fellow content creator, Quelimika, who disagreed with my take, responded to said video. A year later I responded once again. After this exchange, the channel Mr. Imhotep made his own response video to me, then Quelimika responded again. In the meantime, the channel The King's Monologue and a number of smaller channels had also been putting out content about me on this matter. I've just finished watching and listening to every major video response to me, including all live streaming from these channels. That's over 7 hours of content. Every single minute, hour, sentence and word spoken has been carefully examined, statements categorized, points sorted in appropriate folders to facilitate the making of this meticulous video. I show it so that this time they'll believe me when I say that I watched everything. Not hyperbole. I felt like an FBI agent in those rooms with the headsets you see in the movies. As we always do on this channel, we'll now advance this argument through dedicated, thematic chapters. Do I have a problem with the fact that so many channels have made response videos to me? No, criticism is a defining feature of any academic pursuit. Happy to engage. With that being said, among other things, I'm about to respond to a series of specific accusations directed to me, and I will demonstrate these to be unfounded with such a level of certainty that if at any point you believed any of these, you'll see the truth again. But before I do that, I know you noble ones support me, and your blood will boil when you'll hear some of the things these creators said, and as a result some of you will have an aggressive response. Remember that I don't condone any form of harassment. Understand that some of these accusations, even though they are demonstrably wrong, they do not come from a vacuum, and I would be unfair if I didn't take at least partial responsibility in causing some of these accusations to happen due to the way I structured my original video response. Transparency, honesty and honor above all. So I have to say that. Do not go to these channels to attack them. Every time the most militant of my detractors come here to insult me and attack me, I screenshot those comments and then use them against them. So don't give them this ammo against me. If you want, just go and share your opinion, but do it in a civil manner. That will show that we are a community that responds to attacks with civility. I will today double down and stand up to defend those points that I believe were valid, but I will also admit fault when fault is on my side. Since doing so will encourage critical thinking and logical discussions. At the end of the day, the purpose of this video is not to win a debate, but to find the truth. On my original video response, I classified Quelimika as an Afrocentrist, and I described this channel as being focused on Afrocentricity. This statement generated the following response.
So already, as the video starts, Metatron does something that I think is quite damaging to the debate, and that is stating that my channel is devoted to Afrocentricity.
Try and throw a label on what you do, and that's one of the quickest and easiest ways you can discredit someone's argument. You don't have the right to place that term on me, so I just find it very, very annoying.
Exactly, like why are you throwing me in a box when I actually never said it on my channel? That I just know how it sells to people, like what they perceive when they hear Afrocentric. It discredits you, but I know what it means, but it doesn't mean that others...
I honestly used the term Afrocentricity and Afrocentric because I believed it was the correct nomenclature and that it was describing your channels correctly. And considering this sort of titles used by, for instance, The King's Monologue, I'm not sure I can be 100% blamed for this. However, I'll have to admit that The King's Monologue brought up a very good point when he said this.
But at the same time, I also know what you're trying to do. You're trying to undermine me. So I'm like, yeah, don't call me that, because you're just using it as a way of undermining my arguments.
That was not my intention, but I do understand where they are coming from. We need to give them that. How people will have a preconceived negative idea of whatever point they'll make just based on the term alone, without even dignifying the points they raise with a mindset-free analytical approach. So, as a gesture, I've updated the title of my previous response from this to this, and I've also edited out the part where I said that his channel was focused on Afrocentricity. The change is now current. To show you that I'm acting in good faith, on this video we'll refrain from collectively addressing you as Afrocentrists. I would of course appreciate if you could avoid using the term Eurocentric in a way to try and make me look bad, since I never use that term to classify myself. If anything, if I get a choice, I'm truth-centric.
Part of me now thinks that he just Googled these names. Sorry.
This led me to question both the competence of these linguists and even their existence.
Since it has been suggested that the team that I mentioned at the very beginning of my original response video doesn't exist, you're not my imaginary friends, right?
I exist.
As you will have undoubtedly noticed, 3 of the 4 members of the team have now appeared on camera. The anthropologist hasn't. That is because first, she's not comfortable appearing on camera. Not only because she's camera shy, but also due to the toxicity of some of the attacks in the comments that my team and myself have received. And we need to respect that. What we did today, we didn't have to do.
He's pretended that he's got this huge team of scholars.
And neither Quelimica nor Mr. Imhotep ever show their faces. But if anyone is gonna try and say that the anthropologist doesn't exist, I'll be happy to swear in front of a court of law. I would like to now thank the members of my team that have showed their face today. That takes courage, considering the kind of attacks that I get online, but we are here for the world to see, and we have nothing to hide. The number of times you guys use this term is concerning to me.
So he's quite clearly lying here, which is...
Metatron is simply spreading lies. But that's a lie. Metatron lied to you.
It appears that for you, a disagreement equals a lie. But that's not what a lie is. I can disagree with you academically. I can think differently from you. And that wouldn't involve a lie. To be a lie, the intent needs to be to deceive. And is this a pattern? You bet. Everyone is a liar, from creators to academics to an entire continent. And talking about possible lies.
When he did his video on the Nordic Romans, Mr. Imhotep had criticized him on the fact that he was doing videos just attacking these topics, and he saw that, you know, him jumping on only when a movie, so when a character is turned black or anything, would look bad on him. So he did that video to balance things out. I think that's my opinion. That's how I saw it. But anyway, I could be wrong.
Just to make sure the accusation is clear, Mr. Imhotep posts his response, I see it, and as a way to try and do some damage control, I create this video. So that sounds plausible. In fact, King's monologue believes it right away, and so does the audience during the live stream, except that Mr. Imhotep's response video to me was published on the 12th of November 2023, while my video on the theory of ancient Romans not being Nordic was published on the 10th of November 2023. So this whole hypothetical argument that you made and everyone accepted just to make me look unfair is physically impossible. And to anyone watching, don't believe me. Just go check under the video description of every single one of these videos and you'll see that data of publication is a publicly available information. Wouldn't that give me space to now call you, Quelimica, a liar? And yet I don't. Why? Because of something called plausible deniability. I don't know if you did check and you knew it and you still said that, which would be a lie, or if maybe you didn't check and you just hypothesized without doing the due diligence. Still, checking during the live stream would have been the right thing to do instead of leaving it there for people to just believe. And believe you, they did.
He delves deeply into specific topics when it aligns with his agenda, but when faced with information that contradicts his viewpoint, he remains superficial and avoids the truth.
See, the problem with this, Mr. Imhotep, is that you're incorrect. I do have an entirely dedicated video to the idea of white marble in ancient Rome and how the statues were painted, and I thoroughly debunk this idea that the all white marble were a representation of the fact that all the Romans were white. I do have a video about that. Once again, to the audience, don't believe me, link to this video in the description, check it for yourselves. Should I call you a liar now? Plausible deniability. I still give you the benefit of the doubt, but maybe next time before you state something like this, specifically designed to make me look bad, double check And for fairness, I have to tell myself that too, because when I mentioned the idea that I thought perhaps the fact that Quelimika created his symbol just to put Africa on top of Europe, I was wrong. I read anti-European sentiment in that action, whereas what he was doing was just to represent the ancient worldview whereby, from the position of the Egyptians, the north was south and the south was north. So I was wrong about that, and I admit it. Will you? This part that I'm going to discuss now, even though it may seem marginal, in reality is critical for us to be able to continue this discussion. And at the end of this section, you will see that in fact, even though we disagree on a few fundamental things, when it comes to this word and what it means, my position has been misrepresented. This is a great moment to introduce another point of contention, which is the idea of olive skin and the massive misunderstanding that we have here. Because it seems like we're using and interpreting this word in completely different ways, and I think we need to clear this one up before we can jump into evidence, iconography, passages, and research. And I won't use the Photoshop color picker this time, you are right, that was not scientific of me, a valid point of critique.
A majority of the ancient Egyptians would have had olive skin. Now this is pretty loaded, isn't it? What you're doing is you're making an assumption about skin color. Most of them would have been olive skinned, and then he pointed to his own skin, yeah? Olives are black and brown, yeah?
Mr. Imhotep also said that I believe that the ancient Egyptians were olive-skinned and tanned like me.
While Metatron says that Asiatics were the majority of the population and that they were olive-skinned and tanned like him, olive-skinned and tanned like him.
Yeah, they would have been colored like him and modern Egyptians.
Guys, I'm white. I don't consider myself to be tanned. I don't consider myself to be olive-skinned.
Most of them would have been olive skinned, and then he pointed to his own skin, yeah?
Also, let's go to the video frame by frame and see if I really do point at my skin when I say the word olive, like the King's Monologue stated. The majority of ancient Egyptians would have had an olive skin.
And then he pointed to his own skin, yeah?
I never do. You can check it for yourselves. Still, when we say that someone is olive skin, it doesn't mean that we expect that person to have the exact same color of an olive, which is your rebuttal, and by extension, what your audience is telling me now in the comments. To understand why the word olive is absolutely fine to indicate skin color, we need to discuss the concept of dynamics of color perception in communication systems, which is a fascinating topic. I'll leave a link in the description.
Olive skinned like me. What is tanned olive skinned anyway, mate? Honestly, what is tanned olive skin? Olive used to mean olive, okay? Used to be an olive, okay? And if you're olive skinned, this is what it used to mean.
The way you seem to expect people to use color terms is what in linguistics is called utilitarian. But the way we interact with the color world in our language systems is not just utilitarian. And I can prove this with a very brief analysis of lexical conceptual structures in languages both ancient and modern. Difficult words, let me explain. Generally speaking, color terms in languages are used for two specific purposes: description and categorization. Now, within the aspect of categorization, there is a linguistic phenomenon called type modification, which is very common in all sorts of languages, including the languages you speak, as I'll demonstrate in a second. What color would you say is the yolk of an egg? Well, from the dialectical names for yolk collected in the 1980s for Atlas Linguarum Europae, there is a variation in this answer, depending on the language in question. Some say yellow, some red, some even shades of brown. And this is diachronic in nature, which means that there is a change through time. And even in English, the language you're using, white, this is white wine. This is yellow, mate. Now imagine if I opened a bottle of white wine and instead of looking like this, it looked like this. There is nothing wrong with saying that a person has olive skin, and the fact that you make fun of it kind of gives me the idea that then to you, the glass on the left would be white wine. Even in Old Norse, they described high-quality gold and the sun as being red, and this happens in Slavic languages and Old Germanic languages. But what's pertinent in this case is the fact that sometimes the Norse describe things that we would normally describe as being black as blue. And this happens, for example, when they describe ravens in literature, and it's not a matter of structural coloration if that's what you're going with, and Black Africans. The Norse called your people blue, but that's not because they actually saw them blue. It's because the word blue in Old North had a undermeaning of mysterious, exotic. Having responded to all of these comments, I'd like to underline now what I mean precisely when I say that to me the ancient Egyptians were olive skin when it comes to the majority. If we look at the Fitzpatrick scale, which was created to estimate the response of different types of skin to ultraviolet light, you can see that when I say olive, I'm talking about a range of colors. So when you show me a dark brown Egyptian, it fits. And you are not debunking my statement in doing so. A dark brown skin is still included in what we describe as olive. Let's compare it to the older von Luschan's chromatic scale for more examples. I think it's apt because it's a spectrum and therefore allows for readjusting based on the evidence. Now, of course, the same can be said about the word black. It's also a spectrum and many different varieties of skin tone. But the reason why I tend to prefer the word olive is because it includes both people from the Near East and people of African descent. They can both have an olive skin. So I'm not limiting ethnicities. And since I believe in a multi-ethnic Egypt, to me it fits. But whether you agree with that statement or not, what's key about all of this is that by saying olive, I do not mean white. And I certainly do not mean that the ancient Egyptians looked like me. If anything, I'm probably type 2, so number 7 on this scale. What do you think?
He implies that ancient Egyptians looked like him and other Mediterranean groups, which is false.
So, you still want to attack and reject this nomenclature? That's fine. But don't attach to me the idea that the ancient Egyptians looked like me, because I never did say that. I only said it about Cleopatra VII because she was Greek, so it was plausible.
They have pale skin, basically. You're making the argument they have pale, creamy colored skin.
Does it mean that I believe the ancient Egyptians were white? No. Can you see it? The blatant misalignment between the speaker of the strawman and the target of the strawman? How's that fair? And due to this misrepresentation of my original point, I keep getting comments from his subscribers that tell me the ancient Egyptians were not white, stop lying. And this idea that I somehow believe that ancient Egypt was white is also pushed by the King's Monologue. When I say they are mixed or multi-ethnic, I mean that they are a mix of olive and black. And the white inclusions came later, see Ptolemy and Rome. So I consider valid all your attacks against a multi-ethnic Egypt, I'll address them of course, because that is my point. And since you disagree with that take, it is your right to attack it. But I do not consider pertinent your attacks against a white ancient Egypt aimed at me, since that was never my point to begin with.
Metatron is preparing you through character assassination to discredit Quelimica and build your sympathy for himself.
So Mr. Imhotep says that my original video response to Quelimica is a character assassination attempt. Now that's a bit much, but I do understand where he's coming from, and the fact that he stood up to defend a friend, I can respect that. With that being said, since we're talking about character assassinations, well, the character assassination you tried to pull on me makes my original video response to Quelimica look like I'm in love with the guy. Now we're about to get into a very strong section of this video, and some of you will get really pissed when you see the sort of accusations that Mr. Imhotep launched against me, which is why before doing that I want to be fair and show you this. On the video where I publicly announced the fact that my mum was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, Mr. Imhotep left this comment. Now, I dislike the way he built his video response to me, but this shows a man who at least has a baseline of decency. And he also wrote this as a pinned comment on his video encouraging his own audience not to attack me. So I am being fair in showing the good and the bad, and I didn't have to do this, also considering the fact that you accused me of having attacked Quelimica and then systematically removed and not show your audience every single clip where I said this. And he doesn't call me a racist, so Quelimica, I commend you for that. I would like to begin by saying that this is not a direct attack to him, so I encourage my subscribers to not retaliate to that. Skin tone does not matter, because that wouldn't have helped you in trying to represent me as the attacker. I don't think that was fair.
Because it is a very known technique to manipulate people. In this section, Metatron employs another manipulation tactic that supports my previous assertions. The main problem is that Metatron manipulated us all over this video. I will show you every single manipulation tactic he uses, and how at the end people are completely swayed by his apparent likability.
Mr. Imhotep, you accuse me of being a manipulator who is employing alleged manipulation tactics to garner the favor of his audience against and at the expenses of Quelimica, and yet on your video, when you play my clips, you place ominous music when I speak, add a dark, evil-looking filter, you add disturbing noises in the background. My point. Ancient Egypt was a multicultural and multi-ethnic civilization due to its geolocation connecting the Middle East, Africa, Asia and Europe, a strategic location on the crossroad of continents, flourishing around the Nile River, which was a cultural conduit of civilization. Therefore, and get this, you changed the pitch of my voice. I never did that to Quelimika. Beginning with the systematic analysis of lexical resources and lexicosyntactic features of text, we move through a systemic function data analysis of genre and text metafunction. Beginning with the systematic analysis of lexical resources and lexicosyntactic features of text, we move through a systemic function data analysis of genre and text metafunction. Concurrently, when dealing with or using ancient Greek, or even classical Latin vocabulary, you do not deal with absolutes. This is an absolute here.
Concurrently, when dealing with or using ancient Greek, or even classical Latin vocabulary, you do not deal with absolutes. This is an absolute here.
What this looks to me is a psychological operation designed to target and cause unconscious responses in the audience to control them against me, so that even my valid points would look dishonest and untrustworthy. And what do I base this on? Well, there are several empirical studies on sensory integration and pitch manipulation techniques and their influence on social judgments. Link in the description. It has been studied and demonstrated that changes in pitch, specifically raising one's pitch, produce negative results in the perception of speakers by the audience, specifically in matters of honesty and trust. So what am I gonna do now? Call you a manipulator? Because it surely looks like you know what you're doing, cognitive restructuring. And yet, I will give you the benefit of the doubt because of plausible deniability, which you never gave me.
So, you have heard Metatron's point in his own words, something I did not get the courtesy of in his video. Anyhow,
representing your opponent's point correctly during a debate is indeed crucial, because if you misrepresent your opposition's points, then what you end up doing is creating a straw man and attacking that instead. So they are absolutely correct, and it's a valid point of criticism when they say that instead of me summarizing Quelimika's point during my response video, I should have let Quelimika describe his own point by playing his own clips. This in order to contribute to a more fine-grained understanding of the way arguments are perceived, processed and evaluated by the audience. So I apologize for that. With that being said, I don't think that every single point of critique that is being raised against me is indeed valid. To see what I'm talking about, I'd like to now play a section of Mr. Imhotep's video that I think could be revealing. Watch this.
YouTuber Metatron released a video. The video did great as it immediately went viral. It provided hope to supporters of theories suggesting Mediterranean and Middle Eastern origins for the ancient Egyptian civilization.
You will notice that this is constantly brought up in all response videos to me. They all say Metatron states that ancient Egypt was a Mediterranean civilization, and then they proceed to make lengthy sections of their videos debunking the claim that ancient Egypt was a Mediterranean civilization, presenting data to prove instead that ancient Egypt was an African civilization. This is a monumental strawman the size of a pyramid. I never said ancient Egypt was a Mediterranean civilization. Never. What I say is this. The ancient Egyptians were a multi-ethnic African civilization, African civilization, African civilization. So we fundamentally agree with the fact that ancient Egypt was an African civilization in the sense that it emerged in Africa and African people played a pivotal role. What we disagree on is the part where you say that 99% of ancient Egyptians were black, that people who are not black are fake Egyptians, and that all pharaohs were black. I disagree with that because I also think that it being a multi-ethnic civilization, which is my point, people from the Near East, the Levant also played a pivotal role throughout its history. That's what we disagree on, but I never said it's a Mediterranean civilization. Rome is a Mediterranean civilization. Greece is a Mediterranean civilization, not Egypt. So where does this misunderstanding come from? From this section, as we can see on the video made by Know Thyself. Egypt faces the Mediterranean. I am Mediterranean. My sea, my history too.
Ancient Ancient Egypt was by definition a Nile Valley civilization.
Proceeding, Know Thyself will go into a lengthy explanation of why ancient Egypt wasn't a Mediterranean civilization and instead was an African civilization. And to be honest, he does a good job in that section. So I'm not saying that that section is invalid. I'm saying that it's based on a misrepresentation of my point, which is also what every single other video that responded and talked about this did. They all took this statement of mine about being Mediterranean and used it out of context to create a straw man. I'm not saying they did it on purpose, I can't prove that, but let me show you what that statement meant. That statement comes from the section where I talk about the fact that Quelimica uses the expression our history to talk about ancient Egypt and African history in general, which to me is a red flag, and I still stand for that. And then I connect it to the fact that Quelimica's subscribers in my comment section say, stop talking about our history, talk about your history instead. Stick to Europe. And it was very clear that it was a response to that, because I say that. And to that I respond, well, I'm from the Mediterranean, ancient Egypt faces the Mediterranean, my history too. It was my way to say that these people do not have the right to tell me that I cannot speak about African history because it's their history. It's all our history because we are all humans, as I explain on this dedicated video. That was my point, and it was twisted. My goal is to defend objective reality. Your goal seems to want to rectify the current understanding of African history and culture.
He then presents himself as a defender of objective reality, accusing us to rectify the current understanding of African history. Apparently, we are twisting facts.
Rectify. Accusing you of rectifying. I use the word rectify to put myself in your shoes. Rectifying means to make right again. Rebranding Africa, isn't that what you're trying to do? So what you're doing in reality here is that you are taking something that honestly was not an accusation and you're twisting it. I am saying the word rectify, but you're treating it as if I said the words twist, rewrite, or distort history. I never said that. I used the correct word. So that's not on me.
Usually he loves to complicate things, using big words to make his claims sound more important than they actually are.
Any point of agreement will have to be ontological, factual, and documented.
This is at a point where I'm going to jump in now. This is Metatron 101, and this is one of the reasons why when I was responding to him, I get so frustrated. All this bloody word salad, yeah? I haven't got time for it, honestly. Yeah. Don't just throw out words that you have no intention on revisiting again.
When it comes to the way I express myself in my videos, I do love using high-level vocabulary. It's just a form of artistic expression for me. I love languages, and the selection of certain vocabulary to carefully craft the way I present information is probably the thing I enjoy the most about making videos on YouTube, and by the looks of it, it seems like people enjoy it too. And besides the King's Monologue, you use high-level, complicated vocabulary yourself. Check this out.
The phenotypic and genotypic diversity,
or the semantic shift, isn't it?
Anthropological and paleopathological analysis of the basal epithelial cells were packed.
Phenotypic and genotypic diversity, paleopathological analysis, semantic shift. It appears to be a double standard. When you do it, it's fine. When I do it, it's a word salad just trying to sound smart.
Yeah, I can't take it, honestly. All that word salad stuff is like, dude, just speak. You're not sounding any smarter by it.
Unfair. And to be clear, I think you should keep doing it. I think it sounds great, and it makes your video sound more professional. Just for clarity.
All of your arguments will need to be ontological. What? What was ontological about any of the responses that he made? Because I find it bizarre. He didn't touch on ontology at all. As far as I saw, there was no aspects of ontology brought into it. But yeah, I think he knows the meaning of the words.
This problem you have with my usage of the word ontological surprises me, also because I think you gave an incorrect definition, which is probably the reason why you don't think there is anything ontological in my original response, even though there absolutely is.
Ontology is just basically the study of the supernatural, the spiritual, metaphysical. I mean, it's so far from anything he raised in this.
Ontological has two different meanings and two ways of being used. The first one is the philosophical one. That's not the way I'm using it. I'm using it in the second, non-philosophical usage of the word. Outside of philosophy, ontology is used in a different, more narrow meaning. An ontology is the description of what exists specifically within a determined field. For example, every part that exists in a specific information system, and this includes the relationships and hierarchy between these parts. Unlike philosophers, researchers that approach something in an ontological way, they are focused on naming parts and processes and grouping similar ones together into categories. And this is how you use it, for example, in social ontology. The purpose is to understand and describe the underlying structures and relationships between the categories that you define. And this explanation doesn't come from me, but I was paraphrasing the explanation given by Kent Lofgren, PhD and lecturer at the University of Sweden. Link in the description to confirm. All in all, this is me, this is who I am, and that's how I like to speak. After all, this is still YouTube.
I think a lot of my people on my channel don't know that you found something out recently that actually was like, whoa, but where he got all of his info from.
Oh, that one is interesting. Someone hit me up with a link for some blog post about ancient Egypt not being black, and David.
The blog post he's talking about is a blog called Matilda's blog. It's been around for a long time.
And she presented a list of quotes. The same sequence on her blog post is the same sequence you find in Metatron's post, as you will see. It's crazy.
So he basically,
the
word for word, copied his arguments for you from Matilda's blog. So his research, where he allegedly formed a team of skilled scholars and astronauts and metaphysicists with a doctorate level response, was going online to Reddit, finding Matilda's blog, and then it's basically rehashing all of her arguments word for word. That's hilarious. Sorry.
So this is the part where we enter the accusation of plagiarism. What they are stating is that when we say that we did research and examined passages and translated ancient Greek, in reality that never happened. And what they say we did is that we found this Matilda's blog and copied word by word. Remember this. And they say this as if it's a fact, even though they have no evidence. How do I know they have no evidence? Because there can be no evidence. Because we didn't. We as a team were not even aware of the existence of this blog until they mentioned it. I didn't use it. No one in my team used it. This is false. On a positive note, since to try and be as fair as possible, I also have to say that I appreciate the fact that first, it is in fact the King's monologue that provided me with the link to this blog because I couldn't even find it. And second, he did believe me when I said that we did not use it. So I do appreciate that. But I think the part that annoys me the most is that they inflated the claim. Well, actually, scratch that. The part that annoyed me the most is this.
Someone said, is Matilda Metatron's mom? People stop it. Stop it.
But the other part that also annoyed me is that they inflated the claim. They say word by word, copied in the same order, and that of course makes it sound like, okay, this is too big of a coincidence. But that's not what happened. Only a few passages that we used were also present on the blog. Moreover, 3 of these passages, 3, are in the exact same order. Now you call that a massive coincidence? I don't think it's that big of a coincidence because you don't have that many passages, specifically from the Greeks and the Romans, that talk about the ancient Egyptians' look. So it is only natural to converge into the same point, and I'm happy to put it through our anti-plagiarism software, if that's what it takes. Once again, what's missing here is the concept of plausible deniability. We did not use it.
Okay, so straight away he's gone for this very, very poor reproduction of Tomb of Seti I. It's a total mockery. If you look at the original, it looks nothing like that. Okay, nothing like that. So this is just a myth, all right? This myth of kind of like Tomb of Seti. This is people going in and basically trying to back apply European presence into ancient Egypt, even if it doesn't show them as the ancient Egyptians. This is not real. This is not real, so we can't give a qualitative discussion based on this image that you've kind of like just picked over here.
Now, I understand why you would choose not to use this image in your videos, King's Monologue, but I do not understand why you'd be this categorical about it, going as far as saying it's unforgivable to use it. Now, you justify this by calling it a fake, but it's an interpretation. That's what it is. A drawing based on a real ancient Egyptian wall art found on the tomb of Seti I. Just like this and this are all interpretations, and we all use them on videos to show what, for example, the ancient Roman statues and temples actually looked like in period. It is an approximate reconstruction based on pigment examination and literary evidence. Reproductions of all kind are constantly used within any given educational framework. Now, of course, you are more than free to say on your channel that you do not believe this reconstruction to be accurate, and you can defend your point of attack as much as you want, but the burden of proof is on you. The reason why I say that is because Minutoli, who considered this a fitting reconstruction of the original art, was an archaeologist. He was appointed a member of the Academy of the Sciences. Moreover, he was an eyewitness of this wall in the tomb of Seti I, 2 centuries ago. Therefore, it's not so far-fetched to think that perhaps he had a better perspective than we do due to a possibly better state of preservation of the wall 200 years ago. We don't have access to that anymore. And I'm not basing this on just temporal speculation, but I justify it based on something that happened in the 19th century, and this information can also be found on pro-Black Egypt Reddit pages in case you don't believe me. The practice of wet paper for tourism, which is why I'm inclined to believe an eyewitness when he tells me that this is a good representation of what the wall was showing. Talking about colors, I found a study from the University of Florence specifically dedicated to the tomb of Seti I and color alteration with time, link in the description. Now, there are several ways to see how color would have most likely looked like in period. The study in question uses image spectroscopy and mapping techniques for non-inclusive analysis of the paintings in the tomb, including photo-induced luminescent digital imaging, and the results of this study show that there are plenty of images where the colors have darkened and used to be lighter in their original state. Once again, link in the description. So you are correct in saying that some colors do fade with time, but it isn't as cut and dry as you make it sound. Sometimes they fade, sometimes they darken, and that's factual. Is this the best image I could have used? No. Should I have showed it together with the original, maybe right next to it, for context? Sure, I'll give you that. But I do not believe this is invalid. I do trust Minutoli's expertise and direct experience. But let's examine it further. The image, as we can see, represents 4 different people: Nubians, Egyptians, Libyans, and Asiatics. Now, when it comes to the Nubian, apart from the profile, which, as you point out, isn't the most skillful depiction, I mean, the ancient Egyptian did a better job, but he didn't make him white, so I find that sufficient for me, since that's what we are talking about. It's accurate. Now, the Libyan is where we strongly disagree. You say this.
Let me tell you something for free. Libyans did not have this complexion. Okay, this pale white is a complete invention and a complete myth. So here's the original image it was taken from. Yeah, so you'll notice the washed out skin tones there. The place where they have these depictions of these 2 white-skinned Libyans, you can see this looks nothing like.
The Libyans that we find on the left of the recreation picture is not a representation of what we see on the left of the Nubian on the wall, like the King's Monologue is saying here, but it's actually found on the right of the wall. I mean, look, there are no ostrich feathers on top of these people. This is the part where they got the Libyan from, that they placed on the left of the reconstruction on the original wall. You'll see that both the leg and the arm on the right are well preserved. Even today, you can still see the tattoos. I'm sure you're not trying to tell me that this is the color of a black person, because the color of the skin does look very light, almost European light. And when it comes to the way the Libyans are normally represented in ancient Egyptian art, well, sometimes they are dark-skinned, other times they are not. So in this case, of course, Minutoli could have chosen any of these, but I think the fact that he chose the light-skinned version is good, because that's what the wall shows. Now, the Egyptian is the most reconstructed one, because on the wall we only see the feet. But what did Minutoli do to justify this? Well, to me, he looked everywhere else in the tomb and chose the typical reddish-brown hue you normally see the Egyptian represented as. Now, I don't see this as a problem, although then again, you could argue that the tone should have been darker. I'm open to that interpretation, but we also find this color. So once again, to me this does not make it a fake. The Asiatic is the only one that I have to agree may have been lightened a bit too much, but with that being said, when we say Asiatics in context, we mean Semitic people, usually. So before I can really engage with this one, I need to know what you think ancient Semitic people and people from the Near East, were they supposed to be black? I mean, I don't know, so I don't want to create a straw man. You'll let me know. As I promised on our exchange on Twitter, if you convince me that this is a fake, I'll cut it out from my videos. But as of now, you haven't. And I don't think that calling it a fake or unforgivable based on the fact that you disagree with the interpretation is fair. You just disagree and you think it's inaccurate. That doesn't make it automatically a fake for everyone. And now that I have explained this, I think it's time to discuss Herodotus and the way he described the ancient Egyptians in ancient Greek.
Most ancient Greek sources do indeed describe the ancient Egyptians as black on multiple occasions. The people dwelling there along the Nile are black because of the heat.
So, did Herodotus say in his Historia that the ancient Egyptians were black? Well, how about we jump into Greek interlinear and see for ourselves. I will now proceed to give you a full contextual analysis of his words. In period. Let's begin with Book 2, verse 12. On this verse, Herodotus uses this word, same stem, same origin, to describe the black soil or the fertile land of Egypt. On verse 22, he then uses this term to describe the people of Egypt, still same stem. So, does this mean black when it's applied to people? The best way to understand what a term can mean from the perspective of an ancient Greek is to see how they use it in a variety of verses. And when we do that, we'll see that all it means is a dark complexion, not necessarily black in the black African way. Now, whether I agree with you or not, I do need to underline that the following section that I'm going to play from your video does bring a very strong argument in your favor. You will show that the same term used by these ancient Greek authors is used to describe both the Egyptians and the Nubians. Let's watch it and then I'll respond to that.
And Theodorus said this about the people he saw.
But there are also a great many other tribes of the Ethiopians, some of them dwelling in the land lying on both banks of the Nile and on the islands in the river, others inhabiting the neighboring country of Arabia, and still others residing in the interior of Libya. The majority of them, and especially those who dwell along the river, are black in color and have flat noses and woolly hair.
So, the Ethiopians are described with this term in ancient Greek, so are the Egyptians, and since we know that the Ethiopians are black Africans, by extension, so are the Egyptians. It means black. Now, I can respect this point, but I disagree with it strongly. Here is why. I will demonstrate now how this term is used in a huge variety of situations, describing loads of different people. These words are used to describe people from Syria, people from Cyprus, the Colchians from modern-day Georgia. It is later on also used to describe Othello, and it is used also to describe the skin tone of Ulysses. Even though you rejected that, I still think is very valid. It does not matter that it's mythology. It's a term used within a language. I'll get back to that in a minute. Plutarch describes a Syrian mercenary, Diodes, with this term. Syrians are not black Africans. Diogenes uses this term to describe the philosopher Zenon, a native of Cyprus, whom, because of his darker complexion, was nicknamed the Egyptian, from Cyprus. Back to Herodotus, he used the exact same term that he's using to describe the Egyptians to describe another people, the Colchians. These are the people that were inhabiting the modern-day Georgia in Caucasus. He in fact believes that they must have been related with the Egyptians because they look similar, we read. For it is plain to see that Colchians are Egyptians, and this that I say I myself noted before I heard it from others, partly because they are dark-skinned and curly-haired, though that indeed goes for nothing, seeing that other peoples too are such. But my better proof was that the Colchians and the Egyptians and Ethiopians are the only nations that have from the first practiced circumcision. So he's talking about a people that we would not consider black Africans, and he's using the same term, which is why I prefer to translate it as dark-skinned rather than black. Also note how he describes Colchians, Egyptians and Ethiopians, and as you can see he does use Ethiopians separately from Egyptians. even though they had cultural common ground. What this tells me is that if we accept that this term means black in the modern sense, it means that every single one of these people are all black Africans. The way we interpret this, and this includes professional linguists and experienced translators of ancient Greek, is that the term is a lot broader than the modern, politicized, restricted word black, and it includes all sorts of people with all sorts of different degrees of dark skin, which includes black Africans, but also Middle Eastern people, Semitic people, and some Mediterraneans when they tan. And before this gets twisted, I'm not saying the ancient Egyptians were a Mediterranean civilization, I'll get back to that. And our interpretation makes a lot more sense because it isn't based on a modern term and how we modernly expect it to be read or interpreted. We are using and understanding this term in the ancient way. It's similar to how we interpret the word white. The Greeks and the Romans used several terms to describe themselves, and these can be translated as white, but that should only be interpreted broadly as people with a lighter skin or low levels of melanin, rather than in the modern sense of Benjamin Franklin used to mean basically only people of certain Germanic groups. I also have this story which sheds light on how the inhabitants of the Delta, which are also Egyptian, were considered. There is a very famous piece of ancient Egyptian literature called The Story of Sinuhe. I'm sure these creators are all familiar with this. This is from the Middle Kingdom, and it's believed to have been written somewhere between the 12th and the 13th dynasties, as it is widely considered one of the greatest of all Middle Kingdom literary compositions. Of course, this is literature, it's a story, but there is a passage that I think is relevant. So the protagonist is an Egyptian who's gone into exile due to a false accusation and then returns into Egypt. As he's trying to convey the absurdity of this entire ordeal he had to go through, he says, "It was the manner of a dream, as when a Delta man sees himself in Levantine, a man of the marshes in Seti." Let's examine this very quickly because I think it can be revealing. What this passage seems to convey is the fact that it would be absolutely absurd to think that a man from the Delta area of Egypt would be seen in Levantine. For context, Levantine is in Upper Egypt. What this suggests to me is that a man from Delta in Egypt looks differently from a man from Levantine Egypt. So it does seem to indicate that there is a clear difference between people, Egyptians from Delta and Egyptians from Levantine. And this would sit well with my interpretation, because I do believe that the Egyptians in Upper Egypt had a much higher percentage of black individuals, so would be closer to Ethiopians than the Egyptians in the Delta region. This, however, would not sit well with your interpretation, because if an Ethiopian and an Egyptian are the same, both culturally and phenotypically, then why would it be so absurd as to feel like a dream to imagine an inhabitant of the Delta in Levantine? What would be so strange about that if they were basically the same people? If all Egyptians were 99% black, and if Ethiopians and Egyptians looked the same and were so intricately connected? And the other reason why this is very significant to us as a team, because it also attacks this argument frequently presented by Mr. Imhotep, whereby before the Romans and the Greeks, all Egyptians were black, but after the inclusions of the Greeks and the Romans, that's when the Egyptians start changing as a population because of interbreeding. If that were the case, then a man from Delta and a man from Levantine should be the exact same from the perspective of this ancient Egyptian from the Middle Kingdom. This is how I defend my usage of the word olive skin, because even when we look at Herodotus, which is the first one you quote to demonstrate that the ancient Egyptians were black, well, he used the same term to describe people of the Near East. Hence my choice to use olive skin, because it includes people from the Near East and people from Africa, depending on the hue. What you are doing instead, by using a politicized term, black, you are specifically trying to encapsulate the words of the ancient and read them in a modern sense. And when I talk about tan, it's because we do have examples in which sometimes this word is also used, again it's polysemic, to mean a tan. For example, the case in Ulysses, when I read that story about Athena, which for some reasons you rejected because it's mythology, but then again that's very strange that you would do that, since all I was doing by utilizing words used in mythology is cross-disciplinary examination. Nothing wrong. Standard practice in academia when I'm trying to contextualize a word and you need more examples. Doesn't matter that it's used in mythology. It's still a word in their vocabulary, and we can see how they use it and learn from it from a linguistic standpoint. So, were the ancient Egyptians white? No, these passages just debunk that. You're welcome. But there is a connection with Semitic and Asiatic people. You can of course decide to disagree, but at least you can see where I'm coming from. And classifying these opinions that we form based on how we read the classics as lies is not fitting.
My point of contention, again, was that the multi-ethnic argument makes it sound like all ethnicities that were there at some point contributed equally to the foundation of the civilization. That's simply not the case. By this logic, Metatron should have no problem calling ancient Rome a multi-ethnic civilization, since it was present in Africa and Asia too, and that many people of different ethnicities were part of the Great Roman Empire. But were they equal to the people from Southern Europe who founded the civilization? No. So Rome should be classified as another multi-ethnic civilization, and no one in particular should claim it, or at least Africa, Asia, and Europe together should claim the creation and development of the Roman civilization. But we all know this does not stand, because the ones who built the foundational elements that made that civilization what it was, and were the primary group to have unified the other ethnicities under their empire, was a Southern European ethnic group. And Metatron, you make videos where you are not okay with Europeans trying to over-highlight the multi-ethnic side of ancient Rome. In those analyses, you look at the foundational population to back your argument, but for ancient Egypt, you don't do so. But I am not one to ignore that.
I do not think this example fits, because in order to fit, the parameters need to be similar. You're removing a very important factor from this equation: time. Let's go 5,000 years in the future. The year is 7024, assuming that we are still around as a species and we don't have technology so advanced that we would know everything about the past. And then we talk about whether they think America was multi-ethnic in its foundation or not. A much more complicated task. The reason why now it's very clear who founded America is because it's very recent. So you can't put this question in the same spectrum as who founded ancient Egypt, which occurred 5,000 years ago. It is the very fact that we are speaking about something that happened so long ago that makes answering this question very tricky and multi-layered. It's complicated. So you seem to want to prove that there is a double standard at play, because I'm not saying that America is multi-ethnic in its foundation or that Rome was multi-ethnic in its foundation, but I do it with ancient Egypt. Yet even in the case of Rome, the situation is much more documented and it's much more recent. There is in fact a massive difference between when Rome was founded and when ancient Egypt was founded, when it comes to time frame, and you of course know that. In other words, apples and pears. Now, before I continue talking and addressing all of your points, including the Naqada culture and a few other linguistic aspects like the Afro-Asiatic origins, before I do that, I think what we have in front of us now is two options. One, we continue making videos where we attack each other's credibility and we continue the drama. This is option one. I prefer option two. And when I say this, I'm going against my own interests, because if we continue the drama, I'm the one who benefits the most. Let me prove it using your own words.
That's why it was like, my video is like 24,000 views. His video in like a week, 400,000.
Yeah.
So he knows the numbers game. It's like, oh, my video is gonna be more credible because I got the numbers. YouTube is gonna suggest it more because I got the numbers, and his video is just gonna be there.
For me instead, I'm the one who gets more views. My average watch time on that video response is extremely high, and I gained 20,000 subscribers from these two videos alone, together with 1.5 million views. And I'm not saying this to flex, I'm saying it so that you will believe me that I'm once again in good faith when I say, if we continue the drama, it's good for me. But I'm not here for the views, I'm not here for the drama, I'm here for the truth and for the benefit of my audience, and why not, by extension, yours. So let me tell you what option 2 is. Here's what I offer. Option 2. We ditch the liar, manipulator drama, and we instead, behind the scenes on neutral ground, try to find what points in commons we have. Think about it. You say I lie and you have the truth, and your subscribers believe you. My subscribers don't. No change. Vice versa, I say you lie and I have the truth. Your subscribers don't believe me, mine do. No change. That's because people want to look at facts through the prism of what they already believe. But what happens if we find areas where we agree on? But considering where we stand, whoever ends up watching those videos, whether it be from your community or mine, will know, oh well, if they agree on this one, it must be true. Imagine the potential from an educational perspective, and it would be a great way to set an example, as we, as creators, look beyond our own personal interests and monetary gains, and look out for the benefit of our audiences. We put them first. To give you an example of what that would look like, was the Sahara Desert a barrier? You know that some of the people that attack the idea of a Black Egypt use this as an attack against you, and then you, generally speaking people who believe in the Black Egypt theory, show evidence to demonstrate that the Sahara was not, in fact, a barrier. Well, we agree with that 100% as a full team. The Sahara Desert was not a barrier, and we can prove it with passages, for example this one. The interior of Africa in a southern direction beyond the Gaetuli. After having traversed the intervening deserts, we shall find, first of all, the Libyans Egyptians, and then the country where the Leuca Ethiopians dwell. That was Pliny. And there are many other passages to demonstrate that. Now imagine if we could sit down and find 10, 15 points, like, oh yeah, we both agree that this specific pharaoh was indeed black, or we agree on this other point. All of this with the common goal of creating an ethos of open source and transparency for people to access. The views we all collectively gain when discussing these topics clearly indicate an increased interest in empirically grounded research on this topic. There are a few things that I need to clarify when it comes to my original statement, when it comes to ancient Egyptian belonging to the Afroasiatic subgroup, and then all the following discussions that came from that. First of all, I don't understand why you think Hamito-Semitic is a racist term. When I discussed ancient Egyptian as a language, I said it was Afroasiatic, and I also used the term Hamito-Semitic. Although I think I did mispronounce it on that video and I said Camito-Semitic with a K, that is because that's how we say it in Italian, by the way. With that being said, one of your points of accusation is the fact that Hamito-Semitic is a racist term, and you motivated that with this guy being offended by it because it has religious connotations, I suppose. Hamito-Semitic, it is absolutely still in use in mainstream and highest level academia, as you can see here. The term is also still being used by some of the highest and most respected Egyptologists in academia, for example, the main professor at the University of Rome, La Sapienza. And just because you found this scholar who is offended by it and thinks that it's racist and also doesn't like the religious connotation of it, it doesn't mean that now no one can use it, otherwise we will all be accused of being racists. And I'm not willing to concede you that, but even if the term was racist, well, I wasn't using it with that intent. And I think what a person really thinks, and their true intent, and their true heart, is the most important thing, rather than, oh, this is a term, some people are offended by it, maybe it's racist. I didn't mean it in any racist way. In the same way, then Christians should be offended by the words Wednesday and Thursday because they are connected to pagan gods, such as Woden, so Odin, and Thor. Should we all be offended whenever a term has religious connotation? But there are a lot of terms that have connotations to religions and belief systems that the people that use these terms don't believe in. Not to mention, if Hamito-Semitic indeed was a racist term, then one of the most prestigious Western publication companies, Brill, is racist. Look at it this way. It would be like me accusing you of being racist towards Asian people because you use the word Oriental. Well, that word in English is actually frowned upon. Thing is though that I wouldn't do that because, for example, in Italian, Orientale has zero racial connotation and it's used in the highest ends of academia. So to me, when you use the word Oriental, there's nothing racist about that, it's cool. And the same way, this could be a situation whereby maybe in Italian we use Camito-Semitic, Camito-Semita, Hamito-Semitic in a way that we don't feel there is anything racist, but maybe there is in English. I'm willing to listen to that. That's what you guys tell me. I'll stop using it in English, just like I don't use the word Oriental anymore, but I do use it in Italian. So these words are different. An obvious example would be the way to say black in Spanish, which of course I'm not gonna say for obvious reasons, but in Spanish, that's the way you say it. So I ask you to have an open mind with the fact that I'm not a native English speaker. Whether ancient Egyptian as a language originated in Africa, or as you say, say, in the Horn of Africa or in general coming from the south, or whether it originated from the Near East in connection with Semitic languages is still a debated topic. So I do have to underline, for clarity, then there are scholars that believe one way and scholars that defend the other. So basically what Misrepresented, Quelimica, the King's Monologue present or bring forth. So they do have scholars that agree with them. This is not just, oh, Afrocentrists believe that. No, this is something that has actually got some strength in academic discourse. But the part that I didn't like is how you twisted it. So you're trying to prove that Afroasiatic languages are mostly African and only the Semitic branch, so only one among so many languages, is believed to have originated outside of Africa. And when you say it that way, it makes it sound that, yeah, so the majority of speakers of these Afroasiatic languages speak languages that originated in Africa, and only a little minority, the Semitic branch, speaks languages that haven't originated in Africa. But the reality is that the Semitic branch alone has an enormous number of speakers, which is why I believe it is absolutely pertinent to call it Afroasiatic. And I don't have a problem with Afro being at the beginning and Asiatic being latter, because yes, the majority of these languages do originate in Africa, so put Africa first. But the Semitic branch, you really underplayed it in the way you explained this. You do need to put into context the fact that the Semitic branch alone has an enormous number of speakers, and the languages have a massive importance within the subgroup. One of the main arguments presented by those who support the idea of ancient Egyptian being very well connected to the Semitic branch are the people that present all of the different lexical similarities and underline a possible connection or tether between ancient Egyptian and the Semitic language branch. But then again, there are also several scholars that are well respected that say no, the tether or the connection between these two languages is not strong enough for us to present this idea that ancient Egyptian was in fact Semitic, and they do believe that the language originated in Africa. So when it comes to this, I'm willing to explore this more in depth, but I do need support from the Egyptologist in my team, and we are working on this, so a full-on dedicated video to the ancient Egyptian language to really explore its roots and present both arguments and then let the audience make their mind. So I'll get back to you on this one. Now, in general terms, I agree that the Naqada culture is distinctly Egyptian and there is a strong connection between the very beginning of Egypt and Naqada. But to you, the Naqada culture is 100% a black African culture, and yet there are some archaeological pieces of evidence that seem to point towards a different direction. So let me show you those. While it is important for me to say that there are indeed scholars that agree with this take of the Africanity of the Naqada culture, it is also important to say that there are scholars who strongly disagree. Scholars believe that the Naqada culture was born in Upper Egypt in the Chalcolithic period, but its phenotypic traits are as difficult to define as those of the ancient Egyptian. From the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, we read, "The pre-dynastic of Upper Egypt and the late dynastic of Lower Egypt are more closely related to each other than any other population. As a whole, they show ties with the European Neolithic, North Africa, modern Europe, and, more remotely, India, but not at all with Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Asia, Oceania, or the New World." I am reading from the journal to present you a countering perspective, but I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with this, because what I think is that there absolutely is also an African component within the early Egyptian culture in connection with the Naqada culture. But there is something else they say that it's interesting. Check this out. Adjacent people in the Nile Valley show similarities in trivial traits in an unbroken series from the delta in the north, southward through Nubia, and all the way to Somalia and the Equator. At the same time, the gradient in skin color and body proportion suggests long-term adaptive response to selective forces appropriate to the latitude when they occur. An assessment of race is as useless as it is impossible. Neither clines nor clusters alone suffice to deal with the biological nature of a widely distributed population. Both must be used. We conclude that the Egyptians have been in place since back in the Pleistocene and have been largely unaffected by either invasions or migrations. As others have noted, Egyptians are Egyptians, and they were so in the past as well. So there are two things we can take from this reading that I agree with. The first one is that I do not believe that the original populations of Egypt were so affected by invasions, whether it be the Romans, whether it be the Greeks, or whether it be the Arabs, as to have been completely ethnically replaced. And second, it's really difficult to just use cranial or bone examination and just say, yeah, they were all black, They were all white, they were all olive skin, Middle Eastern, what have you. Besides, when we look at the archaeological evidence, in my opinion, it becomes more difficult to categorically state that Naqada culture definitely derives from the south, independently from a possible ethnic connection with the Nubians. Naqada people from the chiefdom at Hierakonpolis conducted a violent expansion into Lower Nubia in the mid-4th millennium BC. The violent encounters with the natives are testified through evidence of interpersonal violence in 5 cemeteries of the predecessors of the A group people, young males buried with weapons in a Naqada cemetery in A group territory, and a settlement pattern shifting southward. And this kind of violent confrontation, which is backed by archaeology, seems to suggest that the ancient Naqada culture, which was created and originated in Upper Egypt, was in fact distinct from the Nubian Group A culture. They fought. Still, from the American Journal of Physical Archaeology we read, the Ethiopian element present in the crania in connection to the Naqada culture is absolutely a real thing, but it doesn't characterize in a univocous way the ethnicity phenotype of the culture, and above all, its variation, which show, just like the previous Badarian culture, important influxes from the Near East on a genetic basis. So what this shows is that we are in front of a continuous superimposition of different ethnic groups throughout the history of Egyptian culture, including the possibility of the Natufiana culture from the Near East, which brought farming and left a genetic trace. This is why, to me, the idea that elements of the Naqada culture having conquered had imposed themselves as a ruling class in Egypt is too simplistic of a vision, and the most recent analyses opt for a much more articulated picture with a long process of cultural exchange, violence between Upper and Lower Egypt. In particular, imagining the Naqada culture as being entirely an emission from further south contradicts the archaeological evidence independently from a possible ethnic connection with the Nubians. The violent encounters with the natives are testified through evidence of interpersonal violence in 5 cemeteries of the predecessor of the A group people. Another interesting piece of connection between the Near East and ancient Egyptian culture, including the Naqada culture, is that when we look at this statue from the Naqada culture, we see that it's very similar to this Sumerian statue and the statue of this Badarian culture and this Badarian statue. Similarly, we can testify to this influx of cultural elements from the Near East, which intensify particularly during the Naqta II or Gerze culture. If the Near East element is a lie created and fabricated by the West, then how do you explain these similarities? As a demonstration of this slow but constant migration of Near Eastern elements throughout the entire history of Egypt, we see that DNA analysis of Egyptian mummies at Abu Sir el-Melek includes specimens starting from the New Kingdom, which show an affinity with the genetic heritage of the Near East of Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures. And what I just said was from the University of Cambridge. Why should I not believe them? Why should I think that the University of Cambridge is lying? Still, when it comes to DNA analysis and what it proves, I can read what they say, but I'm not an expert. And as far as I understand, neither of you. The University of Cambridge says this: usually you tend to debunk these DNA tests when they present mummies that seem to be connected to the Near East or even Southern Europeans. But you do push forward these studies about melanin quantities within over 200 mummies that I think King's Monologue was kind enough to share with me. So what I decided to do is that I'm going to come back to this DNA section, but after having had someone in my team, so adding a genetist to my team, so we can have a look at these from the perspective of a professional. Because I found these studies on the melanin contents on these mummies that King's Monologue sent to me extremely interesting. I've been watching this video. Hopefully I'll be able to have access to the studies proper rather than a video talking about the studies, because that's the way you do it. I couldn't really find the study proper, so it would be great if you could give it to me. Then I will readdress the soul DNA part with, again, as I say, a professional. We'll look into it and we will discuss this more deeply, but on a dedicated video.
Metatron, our king of rigor and goodwill, spends his time acting like the Delta or Mediterranean region of Egypt is the most relevant part of that country, while the south is the land of the inferior blacks. So, the ethnic or true Egyptians are the southerners that Metatron seems to look down on because they were black.
It's the audacity, isn't it? How dare you? How dare you, African? How dare you, African, challenge my Eurocentric knowledge
Okay, so this is a very serious accusation. So I would like to ask a favor to my black subscribers and supporters, because I know you are there in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. I see you in the comments all the time. Do you feel that these two statements pushed forward by Mr. Imhotep represent accurately the way you think I feel about my black subscribers? If anything, the reason why I keep talking about African history, even though people wouldn't want me to, is because I also have black subscribers that do want me to keep going, and therefore I will. And even though you can disagree with everything I say at a scholarly level, I don't think it's correct to try and insinuate or put into people's minds the idea that I have some sort of racist approach to this. That is really out of place. There is zero racism in my mind. Zero. Because as a religious and Christian man, we're all children of God.
Because I saw his response to another big YouTube channel. It wasn't the same energy. He was very cool, calm, just like, yeah, this guy, I'm having a conversation here. But this with me was like, man, you're gonna get it. I'm gonna show you that I'm...
Okay, this is a very valid point of critique, because Quelimika has rightly noted that even though usually when I make response videos to other channels, I tend to be milder, whereas in my response video to him, I was somewhat passive-aggressive. Even though then again, I showed respect, it's just that you guys cut out every single section where I did show respect, at least Mr. Imhotep did. Well, you guys watched it, but you didn't believe it. I don't say it's 100% true, because for example on this video, I go even harsher when I respond to a specific channel in there. Feel free to check it. So to you, I kind of used a mid-range tier. I didn't go super soft, but I didn't go full force. Regardless, why did I choose to not be like nice, and why was there a certain smug tone in some of my responses to you? Well, I hope that you'll be able to see where I'm coming from here, because after you made your initial video response, as I say, I got flooded by people saying this, which already didn't really put me in the best state of mind, but then the King's Monologue started responding, and as I started looking at you all as a community, so you, the King's Monologue, Mr. Imhotep, what I noticed in that there seems to be a common anti-European sentiment. And I am from? Now, I have to say that of all the people and of all the creators in this community, Quelimika tends to be one of the mildest ones. So probably my response should have been softer, specifically because he's not as aggressive towards Europe as, for example, Mr. Imhotep seems to be. So I'll admit fault in that. With that being said though, can you really blame me as a European man when I see statements like this, that I will be somewhat defensive when I approach a discussion or a debate with your community? How would you react to a community that tends to do that? And I'm asking you to be honest in this. Because in my almost 1,000 videos, I have never said one negative word about Africans or black people. Never. You can watch all of my videos, you'll never find one. But whenever I click and I check these videos, what I see is, oh, Europeans lie, the West is lying to you, that's what Europeans do, they steal. And I think that's really out of place, particularly if we want to create any sort of interesting debate. But if you don't want me to be defensive and you want us to take you seriously with the kind of research that you bring forth, which I'm more than happy to do, I think this whole anti-European sentiment should be dialed down, because that does not show an open mind in your regard. Also because I really need you to help me understand this. What does a freaking Dutch farmer in 2024 who is working the land to feed his family, or a student in Portugal, or a Scottish guy in a pub have to do with British colonialists several centuries ago and what they did in Africa? So I do want to put myself in your shoes if you want to condemn and attack colonialism and, you know, the tens of thousands of artifacts that they stole from African people and still show in their museums. Do that. But there is no reason to say Europeans lie, because then you are taking innocent people, me included, that have nothing to do with what happened centuries ago, and you're still holding us accountable and saying that what we do is stole and lie. What the heck do I have to do, or we modern Europeans have to do, with what some colonialists did? You should be angry at the governments of the people in power at that time. And considering the fact that, for example, the King's Monologue said that I shouldn't put all black people in one bucket, I agree with you, But then you should also not put all white people or all white Europeans in one bucket, because a French, a Portuguese, an Italian, a Spanish, an English, a Dutch, and I can keep on stating nationalities, we are not all the same. When you say that all of us are liars just because we have light skin, then I'm gonna have a problem with that. And I think you see where I'm coming from. And that's what your community looks like from the outside. Now, you do whatever you want. If you take a moment because of this video and you think, yeah, you know, I think he has a good point, let's bolster and present the positive aspects of Africa and let that speak on its own, rather than trying to continuously condemn modern Europeans and modern people due to their white skin, and let's drop that negative aspect, then I think you would benefit enormously in public opinion. But if you don't want to do that, which is perfectly your choice, of course, freedom of speech after all, then don't be surprised if then people either of a European descent or a 100% European like me will look at what you present and have a preconceived negative mindset. What did you expect? So do you see where I was coming from when I made my original response video?
It seems like from all the people of these regions, only the Egyptians are pale-skinned with a permanent tan. The others are just depicted white or yellow olive, despite the fact that they tan too. Does it mean that the Egyptians love to depict themselves tanned and never with their natural light olive complexions, while they always depicted the others pale without tan despite living under the same sun? Because if we say that they were tanned, it means that their complexion is not their natural complexion.
Actually, Mr. Imhotep made a very good point here. I have to admit that, even though I hate the rest of his video. But this is a good point when he's combating this idea that I was presenting, whereby the ancient Egyptian color we see could be the result of a tan. So now he kind of convinced me that it's more possible that that is their original color, not a tan. And because of this, I will now explore this possibility with a different mindset. Thanks for this one.
But following Metatron's weak logic, skin color defines ethnicity, and Egyptians were the light-skinned people, while all people living in the south, that he called the blacks, were darker than the Egyptians. Egyptians that he called the light-skinned people, like the mysterious ancient northern Indians, by the way, thus making it impossible for the Egyptians to belong to the black ethnic group, since the colors are not the same. Just with these very basic visuals, I completely annihilated Metatron's entire video.
Yeah, no, this one is very weak instead. You didn't disprove anything, because my point was never to try and exclude black people from being Egyptians. I have said that a percentage of Egyptians would have been black. So when you show me a statue that looks black, and you tell me, you see, that's an Egyptian, it doesn't disprove anything, because I recognize that some Egyptians were black. So no, you didn't disprove anything there. You disproved a straw man.
Here is another image of jet black Egyptians with light brown Egyptians. They'll say the jet black ones are just Nubians living in Egypt, as always. And then this other image, this is from the tomb of Horemheb, I believe, and the men and the women, both the servants, are depicted with this brown They'll say skin. The jet black ones are just Nubians living in Egypt.
This is another straw man. I didn't say that, and I wouldn't say that, because when I say it's multi-ethnic, I include black people in that. So if you show me a very, like, jet black, or even just a black individual, I wouldn't tell you, oh, then that cannot be an Egyptian, that has to be a Nubian. I don't say that. So this is a straw man. I'll tell you absolutely, black Egyptians also existed.
There's more to consider, though. The mosaic of Palestrina, created around 100 BC, depicts Egypt under Greek rule during Strabo's lifetime and predates the other European scholars mentioned by Metatron. This artwork displays a population in Egypt greatly affected by foreign invasions. The northern part portrays a mix of foreigners who are also Egyptian by nationality since they lived there. In the south, we find the native Egyptians who closely resemble indigenous Africans and are akin to the Nubians. This mosaic, crafted by European artists during the Ptolemaic period, sheds light on the possibility that the scholars were describing this mixture of foreigners in the northern part of Egypt.
Whenever you show me an ancient Egyptian that looks black, I'll tell you, okay, that fits within my multi-ethnic position. And of course, if you happen to be able to show me so much art from a specific period, and you show me, look, in this period, 80%, 70% of the art looks very dark-skinned individuals, and then we examine the pigments, and we're like, yeah, this is real. A lot of more people were black in this specific dynasty or in this specific section of Egypt, then I'll be more than happy to readjust my percentages. But it's still multi-ethnic for me until you can prove the 99%, like Mr. Imhotep puts it, of all Egyptians were black throughout the entirety of ancient Egyptian history, all the way up to the Romans and the Greeks arriving, which is a very hard thing to defend, because all I need is to find one pharaoh and be like, okay, this guy, genetic testing, he was not black, and that's already a problem, which is why I think sometimes you attack so vehemently any proof or any archaeological piece of evidence that shows a significant contribution from the Near East, because by doing so, that's a problem, because if it becomes 95%, if it becomes 91%, that it's not all black, which is the position that I believe you're trying to defend. Much harder. With that being said, I agree with the King's monologue when he says, let's test the mummies. Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, if I was in power, what I would do right now would be take every single mummy that we have, test them all. Test every single mummy we find. That's the part that I agree with him. Let's test it all. But all in all, as I was saying, I think it would be very beneficial if we take, for example, every single pharaoh, and you show me all the evidence that demonstrates for you that those are all black, and then I'll put it to the test with the evidence that shows the opposite. And then with my team we can review that and say, hey, we agree on pharaoh 3, 7, 8 and 9, these were definitely black, but when it comes to these others we don't. But at least the ones we agree with, then our communities will be like, yes, if they agree with this, then they must be true.
So when it talks to and people in the ancient world were never described by the color of their hair. That is not a trend, okay? And I will challenge Metatron on that. Even in ancient Greece, they will never describe people using the color of their hair. They won't say, "Oh, he's a blonde." That's the modern thing. That's about 150 years old. But people say, "He's a blonde, he's a brunette, he's this, he's a that." They wouldn't do that.
I accept your challenge, and we are very confident about that one, just so you know, for another video.
Metatron offers a definition of the term Ethiopian, and I find myself in partial agreement with his interpretation. This aligns with what I've consistently maintained. To the ancient Greeks, Ethiopians referred to black people or black Africans in general. According to Metatron's own assertions, this term referred to a particular phenotype rather than denoting a specific geographical region.
Yep, we agree on that one. Passage comes from Astronomica, written by Manilius.
It's important to note that the Astronomica was composed around 30 to 40 AD during the Roman-Byzantine period.
30 AD is not the Byzantine Roman period, it's the Principate. It is such a basic mistake that I'm just gonna say you probably got tired while you were editing the video and you misspoke. On the other hand, just to show you that this is not just me trying to bash, this is a post that I agree with made by Mr. Imhotep. He's lamenting the fact that why do you not have black actors playing ancient Egyptians? And I agree with him. There should absolutely be at least some black actors playing the role of ancient Egyptians, and they would be more fitting than, for example, someone from Denmark, just to say one. I do agree with him on that. Although, of course, the part we disagree with is that for him, they should all be black. Whereas for me, you should just remove the white unless you're doing Ptolemy and show brown and black, including people from the Levant. Anyhow, this was a very long video, of course, and I wish to thank everyone who has spent so much of their time to watch this, listen to me ramble for a very long time, and dive into this discussion. I do believe that there is good in all these creators that have responded to me. I do not consider them as my enemies, and I'm more than happy to be open-minded and look into the evidence they present, including these studies on melanin contents in the mummies, because if you review all evidence, then you will be a higher chance to find the truth, which ultimately is only one. It is notable that both our QPADM modeling and admixture clustering excluded any substantial ancestry in the Nuwariat genome related to the 4,500-year-old genome from Mota, Ethiopia, or other Central, Eastern, or Southern Africa. Does this mean that this man is white? No, but I never said that the ancient Egyptians of the freaking old kingdom, I'm going to say this in full camera, because that's the thing, it's not like they stillman my argument, no, they strawman it. Did I ever say that the ancient Egyptians of the old kingdom were white? No, that would be stupid. I never said it. Were there white Egyptians? Yes. Now given, make period. Because they relocated people from Greece, all that area. And then, of course, as the Roman invade, then a higher percentage, they also create some settlements, apart from the ruling elite, but they created some settlements where Greeks relocated, and then the Romans relocate there. So yes, there is a certain amount of Egyptians, the people that could have been born in Egypt, but they were originally from, I don't know, Italia. We do have some surnames in Northern Africa that are Celtic in origin. So yes, some Egyptians could have been white at that time, but that would have been a minority in the population. The further back you go, the further likely it is that the population will be white, or European if you don't want to use the word white. Some may have been, because you could have had Carthaginians relocating there, and now we know the Carthaginians are of European origins from a DNA perspective. But when it comes to the bulk of the population, they were brown. And then some of them would have been black, and those percentages vary geographically and according to the time. This is what I said. I was right. Every single thing that I said now demonstrated by DNA analysis. And this is not a little small research. No. This was praised by professors at Harvard. This is peer-reviewed stuff. And it says every single thing that I've been saying and receiving backlash and hatred for years, all correct. Boom. This is what the genome says. Once again, the guy had brown skin. Yes, that doesn't make him an African though, because he's connected to the Levant. So unless you think that the Middle Eastern people that are more on the dark olive complexion, unless you think that those are black Africans, then the guy was not from Africa. Well, he was, because he was born in Northern Africa. I mean, just the other day, I read someone in the comments that told me, someone was telling me, hey, I'm black, but when I was a child, my teacher, I told her that Egypt is in Africa, and she told me, no, it's in the Middle East. Well, your teacher is an idiot. Egypt is in Africa. Of course it's in Africa. But, so the guy was African in the sense that he was born in the African continent, but he was not African in the sense that he was a black African. Not this guy. This is not what the DNA says. And so that's a fact now. Like, unless you're telling me that this is some kind of, well, I don't even care what they're going to use to try and justify this. How about we continue reading? I'm having a great time. I don't know about you. Yeah, so we were saying remains Egyptian. They harbor signs of ancestry similar to that of Northern Africans, as well as people from the Middle East, researchers report today in Nature. We read, it's incredibly exciting and important, says David Reich, a population geneticist at Harvard Medical School in Boston, who was not involved in the study. We, open quotes, we always hoped we would get our first ancient DNA from mummies, close quotes. Numerous labs have tried to extract DNA from ancient Egyptians' remains. In 1985, evolutionary geneticists, can't read that, reported the first ancient DNA sequences from any human, several thousand DNA letters from a 2,400-year-old Egyptian mummy. But this is a lot older, so it's even more significant, because what this tells us is that there were population movement patterns already 5,000 years ago from the Levant, which checks out, absolutely checks out. Now, does this tell us about the friggin' Paleolithic inhabitants of this area? No, it doesn't, but it does tell us about ancient Egypt. And at the end of the day, what population lived in North Africa in, at this point, 50,000 years ago, doesn't matter when you're talking about ancient Egypt, because there was no pharaonic ancient Egypt 50,000 years ago. So if that's the discussion we are having, then it's different. We can talk about that. But because these people, usually my opponents, talk about ancient Egypt, and this is ancient Egypt. This is the very beginnings, the dawn of ancient Egypt. And will you look at that? What were the chances that the one guy that we managed to do a genomic sequence, Levantine origin? Once again, I'll state it. The guy was not white. As far as I'm concerned, he can have dark brown skin. He can have black skin. It doesn't matter. He's not from Africa originally. He's from the Middle East. I mean, there are some Indians that are as dark as some black Africans. This is also to tell you how stupid it is to fixate on the words white and black when we talk about these things. But because they are the ones who fixate over it and weaponize the utilization of terms, they are the ones that say that the word Kemet, or Kumat, as it probably was vocalized, regardless, the word Kemet with the vowel of convention through Coptic, they are the ones that say Kemet means the land of the black, black meaning the people. But that's a modern way of using black that people didn't use back in the day. Even the Romans, it's not like they called black people black, they called them Ethiopians, meaning generally everyone of a phenotypic trait that would probably go from dark brown to jet black. But the Romans didn't call them black because that's a modern usage. But they do that. It's obviously the black soil opposed to the red soil of the desert. But no, they will say, no, it's the land of the blacks. It's not. It's stupid. You're reading it in a modern sense. And it's linguistic dishonesty. Because then when it's for them, then they'll tell you, well, white doesn't make sense because people didn't use it back then. But then why are you using black in the modern sense then? It's always a matter of intellectual dishonesty. But intellectually, dishonesty can only take you so far until genetic data is presented and it tells us, Levantine, what you going to say now? Good. All right, let's have a look at the study proper. I've already read the whole thing, by the way, but I would like to share it with you guys. You know, if you could clone an ancient Egyptian, because here is another thing, chances are you could get a black guy, because as I say, particularly if he's from Upper Egypt, you could get a black person who is Egyptian because originally from Kush, but then they moved in there and then their children were brought up in Egypt, so now they're Egyptians. I don't have a problem with that. But if you go statistically, you know what I think? I think that the chances are he will look a lot like a modern Egyptian. And I've heard channels, I don't want to name the channels, but I've heard channels say, oh, when modern Egyptians dress up like ancient Egyptians, they are cosplaying. Well, that's disrespectful, because I do believe there is a certain level of genetic continuity as it's demonstrated here. And so it's very likely that even though some modern Egyptians might have ties to Arabs, others absolutely, particularly through the Coptic element, have ties to ancient Egypt. It's their land. So no, when they dress up as ancient Egyptians, they're dressing up as their ancestors. Once again, if you're a black African and you too have an ancestor who was black and from Egypt, they did exist, that's fine. It's only when they're like 100% black nation, then you're wrong, and DNA just proved you wrong. Well, that area, again, unless you go into the African humid period, that area is not going to be, and that's something that some people that usually argue on my side get wrong, and I do have to say that, is that there was a climate period in Africa. And as I say, it's usually around 14,000 years ago, where the Sahara was green, full of jungles and forests and rivers. Can you imagine that? And the reason is, it has to do with the Earth's axial tilt. So it actually has to do, you will have to, maybe I'll have to invite a cosmologist to really look into this, into the details, but generically, it's because something happened with the axis of the Earth, some changes. And these changes completely affected the climate in that area. And if you look at some of the recreations, so how the Sahara region looked in this specific period, it's mind-blowing to imagine that, full of grass and trees and lakes. It would have been incredible. So yeah, when some people say Sahara was a barrier, I'm like, yeah, when? You need to ask when, because otherwise you may be creating a straw man that lacks academic validity when you say that. I've seen some 3D recreations, and they look outstanding. And the same thing happened with Carthaginian. If you remember, I made my debunking video of that channel that was talking about Carthage, saying that the original inhabitants came from the Horn of Africa. They do full genomic testing. They are all from the Aegean, Anatolian Peninsula. GG, what can I tell you? Checkmate. The hate I'm gonna get for this, guys, but who cares? I'm here for you, because unfortunately, this is an incredible news. Will there be other history channels that are gonna history-focused channels that are gonna show this? I don't know. I think they're too afraid to be called racists. But you know me, I'm doing it for you guys. Fertile Crescent, thank you. Cultural exchange continued to develop through the last 4th millennium with the growing Sumerian civilization of Mesopotamia. This period overlaps with the appearance of additional innovations in Egypt, that's something that I've already covered on my videos, by the way, such as the pottery wheel and the earliest evidence of hieroglyphic writing in the form of ivory tags in Tomb UJ at Abydos, which is a big one. Abydos? I'll go for Abydos. Dated to 3. Yeah, of course, we already talked about this tomb at length. Our knowledge of ancient Egyptians has increased through decades of bioarchaeological analysis, including dental morphological studies of their relatedness to other populations in North Africa and West Asia. This is how it is. In fact, with other teeth, this was already a thing, but now full genomic sequencing? Is it really that strange to think that people in Egypt would be from North Africa and this place? Considering how good these guys moved through the sea. I mean, is it really that surprising? Or is it obvious? But we needed this, I guess. And it's not going to be enough, but hey, I'll take it. However, the lack of ancient genomes, particularly for the early periods of Egyptian dynastic history, yes, remain a barrier to our understanding of population continuity and gene flow in the region, absolutely. This is why, up to now, this is the first time that I focus on the really early dynastic history. Oftentimes, I talked about late Egypt, I talked about Middle Kingdom, but usually I've always been a little speculative when it comes to the early dynastic period because more difficult. The further back in time you go, the harder it's going to be definitive about things, which is also another massive red flag with a certain community because they are definitive about things that happened 5,000 years ago, allegedly. Instead, I'm like, guys, I think geographically, culturally, and looking at pattern trends of this period, it does make sense that Egypt would have been multicultural with intermixture of native North African populations, some black people, since the Sahara was not a barrier, and people from the Near East, ancient Egyptian multi-ethnic beginnings of this civilization, because it's a civilization in this specific area of the Mediterranean basin. It just makes logical sense. I can't prove it because we don't have a full genome. But now we do, and will you look at that? Now I'm going to speak about it, because I speak after I see the evidence. Although individuals from ancient Egypt were subjected to the first effort to isolate ancient DNA, direct genome sequencing has remained elusive. Alright, so we understand the difficulties. I think we can skip this part. And here is the individual. And there is a section here, by the way, which I will read. I know they'll try to use it against me. I will read it. There is a section where they say, they know for a fact this guy is from Mesopotamia ancestrally. But they say when it comes to trying and identify his phenotypic traits, that's the hardest thing, one of the hardest thing to do, because it's not easy to identify that through this kind of technology. But they did say it's likely that he had brown skin, dark brown skin, or possibly black skin. And it's fine, because I never said that they were white. So it doesn't debunk me in any way, shape, or form. And mind you, once again, when we say black skin, it doesn't automatically translate to a person from Congo or a person from the Horn of Africa. In fact, that ancestry is not present. Simply because someone has dark skin, I mean, just to show the obvious, this lady's from Asia. Right? This is an Indian. So, like, black skin doesn't automatically mean... It's stupid to focus on this word, right? Because, but today when we say someone is black, it means, I know, today, but we're talking about freaking... But anyways, I have to show the obvious, that dark skin does not automatically mean someone from Sudan or a Kushite and all that kind of stuff. You would say this is obvious. Some Asians do have dark skin. But regardless, this is the only part of this genomic sequencing that I don't know for sure because it's difficult to recognize. I think the guy had brown skin. Why do I choose that one? Because it's the one that we see the most in the pictorial evidence. Very simple. Yeah, of course, grandma might not appreciate this about debunking everything once and for all. That's what I'm going to call it. They hate it when I do that, by the way, on my videos. Once and for all. This one is going to, once I edit this, it's going to have that title. Let's go. Radiocarbon dating of the skeletal remains show that the Nuwariat individual died between this age here. Okay. So the result supports the initial archaeologist's assessment. The material culture and funerary practices at the site were consistent with those of the 3rd and 4th dynasties of the Old Kingdom. So we are really back in time here. So whoever wants to refute this, you can't use but this is the Ptolemaic period anymore. Can't use that one, you have to come up with something else. The body was placed in a large pottery vessel inside a rock-cut tomb. Fascinating. This treatment would have ordinarily been reserved for individuals of a higher social rank, class, relative to others at the site. Fantastic. As observed everywhere else during the early dynastic period, and at the Old Kingdom royal cemeteries near the city of Memphis. Fantastic. Alright, so, although, this is the part, acknowledging known limitations in predicting phenotypic traits in understudied populations, the Nuwariat individual is predicted to have had brown eyes, brown hair, and a skin pigmentation ranging from dark to black skin, with a lower probability of intermediate skin color. So, this part about the phenotypic traits is all about probabilities. We don't know. But it doesn't matter, because any skin he would have had, maybe he had olive skin, maybe he had that type of olive skin that would encompass brown skin as well, probably what I would say, or maybe he had black skin. It doesn't really matter, because when you look at the rest of the study, he's genetically tied to the people of ancient Anatolia and Mesopotamia and the Levant. Here we are. Guy has Asian connotations. The individual was genetically male, consistent with the expressions of standard skeletal features. A further osteological examination revealed that he would have stood 157 to 160 centimeters tall, so it's kind of short. He lived to an advanced age for the time, approximately 44 to 64 years. Once again, there is a space because it's not easy to work with this level of details. The upper end of this range is the most probable. So he was kind of old, as evidenced by his heavily worn teeth and age-related osteoarthritis in most joints and vertebrae, in some cases severe. This so basically tells you that he was doing manual labor, an artisan of a craftsman of sort, because if you have manual labor in conjunction with an upper echelon, then it's usually craftsman or someone that has money but produces goods that are very expensive. This is huge, so he makes good money, right? Because if it's physical labor but it's a farmer, then he wouldn't be buried as someone who was upper class. So it's one of those things. Ramses made it to 93. I know, but Ramses probably had access to the best medicine and food of the period. This and various activity-induced musculoskeletal indicators of stress revealed that he experienced an extended period of physical labor, seemingly in contrast to his high-status tomb burial. The pattern of osteoarthritis and stress indicators further imply the form of physical activity that he routinely engaged in, which some researchers maintain can provide clues concerning occupation. In this case, although circumstantial, they are not inconsistent with those of a potter, as depicted in ancient Egyptian imagery. Estimates of biological affinity based on dental morphological features and cranial measurements parallel the genomic results below. Okay, so that's why I was telling you most likely this guy was an artisan. Okay, so we used the QPADM framework to model the genetic ancestry components that best represent the Nuwariat genome using a fully rotating model competition approach, in which a set of candidate populations there are candidate populations iteratively used as sources to conduct one source, 2 source and 3 source population ancestry models, whereas the remaining candidates are set as outgroups, right populations. We used a set of 13 populations from Neolithic and Chalcolithic West Asia, North Africa and North Mediterranean region that predate Nuwariat individual as potential sources. Not even one did they feel they needed to use from the Horn of Africa or Sudan. Mediterranean region, North Africa, Chalcolithic West Asia, and Neolithic West Asia. No single source model fitted the data, and then it says model with Morocco. Instead, a single 2-source model, so it was mixed. It was a mixed individual, makes sense, met the significant criteria, which consisted of a mixture of 77.6 plus whatever. Ancestry represented by genomes from the Middle Neolithic Moroccan site. Okay, so he had some genetic ancestry from modern-day Morocco. And then this is the big one. And the remainder most closely related to genomes from 9000 to 8000 BC Neolithic Mesopotamia. A round of applause, guys. Round of applause. Right, in addition, 2 3-source models showed similar ancestry proportions, but with a minor contribution of a third ancestry component. He has a third ancestry component, represented by genomes from the Neolithic, Chalcolithic, Levant. So this guy, 2 out of 3 components are from the Middle East. Ancient Egyptian. Old Kingdom. Oh, what a day. What a day, my friend. Here X represents the rotating sources of the QPADM model with the addition of Levantine Paleolithic, Anatolian Paleolithic, and the Bronze Age Levantine genomes. It's a slam dunk. Yeah, and here, look, although the timing of the admixture event cannot be estimated directly, supplementary table 11 and supplementary note 4, this finding provides direct evidence of genetic ancestry related to the Eastern Fertile Crescent in ancient Egypt. Archaeological evidence lends support to the early Neolithic shared regional ancestry between Egypt and West Asia, because once again there is no wall here and there is a massive sea that can be navigated, so no shit Sherlock, given its proximity. See, I am saying the same thing that these guys are saying. So if you think that I don't know what I'm talking about, or my team, including the Egyptologist, as I've been accused by, know thyself, then are you going to say this about all of them? Are you the only repertoire of truth? How does that work? Are we all wrong? Seriously. Because we are saying the same exact things. It's just that I said it before the data, and they're saying it after the data. Still, it's here. I mean, some professors have been saying this before, but yeah. Egypt was one of the first external areas to adopt a Neolithic package that emerged